Former merchant, disillusioned with people, often pondered the contradictions of human nature in his mind, and in moments of solitude he was overwhelmed by the desire to erase his existence, disappear without a trace, and cross out everything. But each time, succumbing to melancholy, he returned to routine and never understood why these thoughts would not let him go. Words and actions of people shackled him with caution, as if in chains without escape, but a sudden lottery win gave him a chance to break this vicious circle. He quit his job, moved to a quiet town in Hokkaido, and became a farmer, considering this path the only right one and determined by time. Cursing loudly, he suddenly realized that he found himself in another world, similar to an RPG. Strange landscapes, unusual architecture, and bizarre creatures confused him even more, and sharply looking around, he shouted, trying to understand what this place was and why he was here. Exhaling with relief, he decided that for now this was enough. Stretching upwards as if yawning, he whispered that freedom is a wonderful thing, and his thoughts again returned to this strange world. Everything seemed so unusual, and at the same time fascinating. At first panic gripped him, but he quickly decided he would manage. Fortunately, in this chaos he found himself here together with a chicken coop, and a tool shed the eggs turned out to be edible. The tools were perfect for gathering wild plants, and he realized hunger would not threaten him anytime soon, because he had everything needed for survival. If this is another world, then there is definitely magic and abilities here. He tried various spells and gestures hoping for a reaction, and now, after several attempts, something finally responded. He tasted the fruit and a hint appeared before his eyes. Durian fruit, so the skill works, but with a limitation. Detailed analysis is possible only for what he was about to eat. Pondering, he guessed that by cooking this fruit with the magical herb, virgin, something useful could be obtained. Seeing a monster, he immediately began luring it into a pre-prepared trap. Retreating, he shouted loudly to attract the creature's attention, and when the monster stepped into the trap, the hero exclaimed with joy the plan worked perfectly. Satisfied, he opened the character menu and saw a level up from level 2 to 3. When the status window appeared for the first time, he was frightened, but now nothing surprised him anymore. Seeing the new level, he only sighed. The third seemed too weak to be happy about. Defeating monsters, he gained the opportunity to evaluate them. The window showed that this was an inhuman creature inhabiting the entire Lancaster region, and he briefly wondered whether it was a goblin or if that was the name of the area itself. Reviewing the loot, he decided to take only equipment because anything useful could be decisive for survival. Approaching the workplace, he took the found stones and healing herbs and began mixing them. First, he took a fire stone with the property of flame and a femtostone for polishing, crushed and carefully mixed them, obtaining an abrasive flame with which, by polishing the goblin dagger, it was supposed to become fiery. He realized that the polishing material allows imbuing other types of weapons with new properties, so he needed to collect as many resources as possible. The next step was herbs healing iron, magical virgin, and the recently found fruit of the weed potato. Iron restored strength, and virgin petals charged with magical energy. Carefully straining the infusion, he smiled. The potion succeeded. Its effect was impressive. It restored physical strength, healed moderate wounds, and replenished magic reserves, but he knew that ordinary herbs worked slowly, required mountains of raw materials and complicated matters, so he was intrigued by the idea of brewing a potion from the poisonous herbs bujur and gadel to make the effect instantaneous. He decided to test the idea and combine the poisonous potion with an antidote. After taking a sip, he immediately ate the marlin herb, which neutralized the effect of bujur and gadel, but his body could not withstand the trial. He fell to the ground, trying to regain consciousness, and bitterly thought that if anyone saw him now, they would surely consider him mad. Something clicked in the hero's mind. The obtained potion was a strong poison, so he decided to coat arrow tips with it in battle. His thoughts jumped to growing herbs. If transplanted with roots into the soil, they would take root. And suddenly he was struck with inspiration. He exclaimed, "This poison is not only a weapon but also bait." He noticed changes and froze in surprise. After feeding the chickens the herbs, their wings shone brighter. Interested, he used assessment and discovered that the chicken had become a herbal chicken. Its meat now restored strength, cleansed the body of toxins, and added nourishment, and he, stunned by the result, could not believe his own eyes. He rejoiced that he had prepared the chicken carcasses in advance and roasted the meat over the fire after feeding the chickens medicinal herbs. As soon as the first piece entered his mouth, he was filled with delight. The taste was incredible, and savoring each bite, he exclaimed that the chicken's life had not been in vain. After burying the chicken remains, he made a tiny improvised grave and bitterly felt that part of its life remained here, in this world. He took a deep breath, gathered his will. It was time to go to the city and sell everything he had created. Understanding that he could not do many necessary things alone, he decided to earn money to buy what was needed. He struggled forward and muttered that he was not used to such long journeys. His legs felt like sticks. Seeing an old man with a horse, the thought flashed whether to buy an animal in the city. Reaching the gates, approaching the guard, and confidently calling himself a merchant turned out to be easier than enduring the response. He only blinked in confusion. Showing the potion and herbs to the guards, he confirmed that he was a merchant, and they let him through without questions. He still did not understand the local language and saw no point in learning it perfectly. He decided that knowing the words sell, buy, thank you, a few simple greetings, and numbers was enough for trading. In the city, he accidentally came across the Adventurers Guild. A board with task announcements hung in the hall, and near the counter was a cash desk with information about rewards. Without hesitation, he immediately went to the board and carefully began examining the available missions. His main occupation became catching long-toothed sea bass, and he faced a choice to turn them in or look for partners for battle. Moreover, he did not know the local language, which only complicated the situation, and just after leaving the guild, he heard someone loudly calling him on the street. Two people addressed him, a petty merchant and a weapons and armor seller named Margot, who were especially respected in the city. Greeting them, the hero showed a fiery dagger. The seller's eyes widened, and he immediately declared that he would buy it, and then he realized here weapons with special properties were valued above all. He sold the fiery dagger to Margot. The merchant's wife became angry. Her eyes flashed with indignation, but he did not care. He knew how to forge new blades. The merchant Margot whispered something. The hero caught the gist and understood that he was being called to the city, but he answered firmly he refused, not wanting to give up his solitude. Those old impulses to break all the ties that tormented him in the past world made themselves known here as well. He never knew when they would awaken because he was clumsy in relationships with people, and that hadn't changed. But now he had enough gold to buy a horse, and he even wrote it in chalk on the board after learning that the language of this country was called Lancaster. When he applied the assessment skill to the Japanese sentence, it displayed in the Lancaster language. The translation took time, but it at least allowed written communication. The merchant Sarasa gave a sign that she would help buy a horse, and he decided to trust her, somewhat confused but patiently waiting. Soon Lady Sarasa returned, leading the horse, and her unexpected speed greatly surprised the hero. He gave her gold coins, took the animal, and decided that now returning home would be much easier. After finishing all matters, he said goodbye to the merchant Margot and Lady Sarasa and set off back. Surprisingly, Margot and Sarasa accompanied him all the way to the very plot, and this did not please him. Along with the horse, they left him a stable. It was immediately built on his land, and when they also offered to build a forge, he was completely confused, thanked them, froze, and tried to comprehend what he had seen. He abandoned city life because he feared those same sudden impulses that once haunted him. Closing himself off, he unconsciously pushed people away, but Margot and Sarasa, despite everything, continued gently overcoming his barriers, as if they did not want to leave him alone. Everything had already gone beyond simple business relationships. He felt something more, though he did not want or could not admit it, and yet he did not want to bind himself with new chains that went beyond what was necessary for survival in this world. He even had certain plans and concerns. He thought he absolutely had to repay these two people, exactly how he had not decided yet, but he felt well that without their help his life in the new world would be much more difficult and lonely. Construction was completed, and the hero reached the level of a merchant farmer. The new horse named Ronan seemed to appreciate the stable too, slowly walking around and sniffing his new home, and the hero watched with pleasure, feeling that the farm had finally become much more orderly. According to Margot and Sarasa's plan, a forge and stable appeared on the farm, complementing the chicken coop and tool shed. Now he had enough space to store crafted items, and the hero felt he could calmly forge weapons and brew elixirs without worrying about monster attacks, so he began brewing a decoction from virgin herb and antidote marin. Margot and Sarasa sincerely took an interest in his work, and immediately noticed he had obtained a new potion, magical restoration, with the effect of neutralizing moderate poison. The hero decided to split it in half. Keep one part for himself, put the other up for sale, and while looking at the forge, felt that he could seriously engage in production, although the question of gratitude still remained open. He was puzzling over how to thank Margot and Sarasa a treat. Dinner, he had salt. The city sold only dried meat and stale bread, so a fresh dish would bring real joy. If he added herbal spices and divided the meat, it would be enough for 3, but he hesitated. There would be fewer chicken eggs, and they were extremely valuable. Although hunting did not appeal to him, he still thought about prey, at least a rabbit. Checking the trap, he was surprised to find not small game but a monster resembling a wolf. This turned out to be timely because food and experience were extremely needed. Having received a level up, he pondered, doesn't this look like a cheat when you can level up so easily? Using evaluation, he found out that before him was a wolf monster common in Lancaster, and the hero decided that this creature could become not only an enemy but also food. Fortunately, the guild had a workshop for disassembling loot. Without it, he wouldn't have managed, as he had no experience processing a wolf. All that remained was to wait, and while he was browsing the task board, he came across a strange one. Pacify the cockatrice, which struck him by the very word, as he had no idea what kind of creature it was. Although the mission was not his concern, suddenly the guild administrator named Dan approached, and he barely understood his words but clearly heard the name, Kai, which confused the hero and made him wonder whether to follow him. Pointing evaluation at the signboard, he found out it was a dojo. The master turned out to be Kai himself, who greeted him as Keigo Okuda, and a premonition ran through him that something important might happen here. He wondered if he could learn combat skills, as he had long wanted to master self-defense techniques. At first, he decided to thank him and quickly said thank you to Kai. Watching the dojo instructor, he saw how he destroyed a mannequin with one strike and tried to comprehend the power of this incredible move. Master Kai handed him a wooden sword, like a quiet invitation to try. The hero took the weapon, assumed a fighting stance, and at that moment the sword in his hands lit up. Focusing, he struck the mannequin. Having acquired a new skill strike, the hero thanked Kai and, leaving the dojo, noticed a sign. It said that due to numerous deaths of adventurers from monster attacks, Master Kai teaches beginners basic combat strikes for free. Kai's strike power stunned him. He realized that such techniques, with proper training, could become invaluable, and he was sincerely grateful for the chance to learn something beyond evaluation. So after gathering groceries for dinner, as a token of gratitude to Margot and Sarasa, he set off home. On the way, he noticed a stone statue of a goblin, and later his gaze froze on the cockatrices. Realizing the danger, the hero spurred his horse and ordered it to move faster. Running into the barn, he pressed the chicken to himself and, trembling near the door, sobbed from fear. Hearing a knock, he shuddered even more, but he thought, what if it's a person? Opening the door with fear, he saw before him the merchant's wife Sarasa and hugged her tightly, not holding back tears. The relief was so strong that he cried even harder, feeling the burden lift from his soul. When the merchant's wife heard his sobbing, she asked again if he was scared. He cried until he noticed Margot nearby and an unfamiliar face, and, ashamed of his own weakness, tried to compose himself because he looked pitiful before someone he saw for the first time. Margot remembered the cockatrice, and the hero instantly recalled the quest. He began to hesitate whether Margot, Sarasa, and the unfamiliar adventurer would set out to tame the monster, but gradually calming down, he decided to trust them. He did not see the whole picture, but he knew, by giving up the weapons and medicines he had managed to prepare, he would make his contribution. This was his way to help, even though he himself did not know how to participate in battle. Having handed over the necessary supplies, the hero watched in fascination as Sarasa unfolded the blueprint of the cockatrice taming plan and explained step by step what to do. Everything looked as if they were preparing for a major operation. The hero asked confusedly whether they really wanted him to shoot a bow after all. It seemed to him pointless to risk his life. Not long ago, he was an ordinary employee of a trading company, and in this game-like world, death was too real. Margot, Sarasa, and the unfamiliar adventurer persistently encouraged Keigo, convinced him to act together, and assured him that it would be safer in battle. They would not allow the monster to harm him. Keigo felt it to his bones. Giving in to fear and doing nothing meant condemning himself. He would not survive alone, so preparing for the clash with the cockatrice, he had only one sincere hope: to return home alive. The cockatrice was so huge that he simply froze. At that moment, the hero could not help but envy Sarasa, who stayed to guard the house. Having made sure that Margot and the adventurer were ready, he focused on the upcoming battle. He aimed the bow and fired a poisoned arrow that pierced the cockatrice. With this, he gave the allies the signal to start the offensive. The battle began. After several blows, the hero realized that his comrades were clearly of a much higher level, but at that very moment, the monster focused on him, began charging an attack, and he understood that he would not have time to dodge. The adventurer pushed him aside at the last moment, and thanks to this, they were able to partially avoid the cockatrice's deadly blow. The hero froze in horror. His body began to be covered with a stony crust. At that moment, Margot, protecting him and the adventurer, shouted about a detoxification potion. The hero hastily took it out, handed it to his partner, and drank his own portion. Margot pressed the cockatrice's jaws to the ground, and the hero realized the only chance was a double counterattack. Although the forces were uneven, together they could win, so he gripped his weapon, focused, and together with the adventurer struck a blow, putting all his determination into it. After their joint counterattack, the strike hit the target. The cockatrice gave one last piercing scream and collapsed, completely exhausted, and the hero and the adventurer, breathing heavily, realized that the battle was over and the monster was finally tamed. Keigo Okuda rose to a higher level. A shock passed through him. He could not believe that their squad had really defeated the cockatrice. Still confused, he heard the adventurer introduce himself, Juno. Overcoming the turmoil, he sincerely thanked both Juno and Margot for their help in the battle. The hero thought that even if the allies were powerless alone, the combined efforts of the three gave victory, and he understood. One arrow, like himself, could be fragile. Whether it was just luck, he was more frightened not by doubts, but by hidden impulses inside that whispered to end it all. In honor of the victory over the strongest cockatrice, they held a small celebration. Keigo treated Margot, Sarasa, and Juno to meat generously seasoned with garlic and salt, and asked his friends not to rush to eat to their fill and savor every piece after the hard battle. Keigo sincerely believed that a well-prepared dish could convey a whole palette of feelings. He brought even more drinks to support the warm atmosphere, and in his soul felt sincere gratitude to Juno for help in the fight, and also to Sarasa and Margot for the stable and forge, which became invaluable support. During the meal, they suddenly noticed that blue wolves were sneaking up to the camp. The hero counted 3 predators and decided that the smell of meat attracted them. The tension in the air sharply increased. At any moment, everything could escalate into a dangerous clash. He thought the appearance of strong monsters due to the smell of food is an unexpected phenomenon, but if they do not show aggression, there is no point in attacking first. He understood that a reckless action could create unnecessary problems. The friends understood his intention and decided to ignore the wolves, continuing to eat, and he noticed Sarasa's smile and mentally asked her not to laugh so openly. He wanted to remain neutral and not provoke hostility, because after all they had been through, the most important thing for him was to survive. Having sent his companions back to the city, the hero began cleaning up after the meal, rejoiced. He managed to thank Margot, Sarasa, and Juno, and at the same time practiced a little. Looking back at the field where the wolves had recently been, he decided to prepare in case they returned. Having dug pits and made a kind of nest trap, he covered it with bunches of poisonous herbs and hid in ambush. The hero patiently waited for the blue wolves to appear again and fall into the cunning trap created by his own hands. Keigo decided to set up a rattling alarm around his territory in case of a visit from the blue wolves to hear a warning. Having made it with his own hands, he felt confident that now he would be ready for an unexpected threat. He set a trap for tigers bought at the guild. When the work was finished, the hero felt relief. His lands became much safer, and the chances of survival noticeably increased. Although he lived on the outskirts, he hung a warning sign: let everyone know that a person lives here, and it is dangerous to approach. After finishing work outside, he put away the tools. He thought about repairing the hut, but first decided to make himself a shield. Sighing with relief, he equated cleaning to a boring but necessary task. Once started, you must finish. The boards were all used up, but this did not surprise him, because today he had used them for many things. His small hut, resembling a chicken coop, was now a real home, created with his own hands. Finally, it was time for dinner. The hero prepared a steak from a blue wolf, seasoning it with healing herbs of iron and a pinch of salt. For the dish, he chose a liqueur made from Milano fruits, which paired wonderfully with the meat. And although the food repeated the lunch, the taste was amazing. The alarm made him flinch. Could it really be the same wolves? Armed, he slowly stepped out of the hut, hoping that it was just people who needed something, and not the predators he had seen during the day. Stepping outside, he saw with horror that one blue wolf had fallen into a trap. His hopes instantly vanished. These were not people. Realizing the danger, he drew the bowstring and released an arrow straight into the predator struggling in the trap. But 2 were still missing. He carefully looked around but noticed no others anywhere. This made him wary. They could not just disappear like that. Straining his eyes into the darkness, he tried to catch the slightest movement, feeling that the pack was preparing an ambush. Suddenly, wolves rushed at him from both sides. Keigo barely managed to react. His heart pounded wildly, his body stiffened with tension, ready for desperate defense. He knew, if he did not handle this attack, the consequences would be fatal. Gathering all his strength, he pierced the first wolf with a single sword strike, and with his shield pushed the second directly into the trap. His movements were sharp and precise, like those of a true warrior. Pulling the sword from the fallen predator's body, the hero felt adrenaline drive away fear. Despite the terrible danger, he was focused. Now only one enemy remained. The hero loudly shouted the attack command, activated the skill strike, and with one mighty swing finished off the last blue wolf, putting an end to their threat. Feeling a level up after the victory, he fell onto the grass and stared at the sky. Thoughts of the closeness of death did not leave him, and he even thought about writing a death note, because no matter how much his strength grew, it was still not enough. Hearing a rustle, Keigo suddenly jumped up, ready for a new battle, but upon closer inspection, he noticed something completely different that suddenly caught his attention. A little wolf cub approached the body of its mother, was sad for a moment, but as soon as it noticed the hero, it instantly perked up and, as if nothing had happened, happily began running around him, radiating sincere trust. The hero understood. The pack wanted his death, but only the wolf cub remained. He took it in his arms, and his heart trembled with the responsibility for this little life. Looking at the puppy, he realized he could not take its life. Bowing to the body of the she-wolf, the hero decided to raise the cub himself, and exhausted, returned to the hut, feeling a strange warmth from this decision. With a heavy heart and a body exhausted after the battle, he lay down to sleep, holding the wolf cub close. In his warm embrace, he quickly fell asleep, feeling a fragile but safe security. Sarasa, seeing the puppy, immediately rushed to pet it, the hero hurriedly shouted that the wolf cub was not for sale clearly. The little one was very dear to her. The fight with 3 wolves was difficult, so he asked Sarasa and Juno for help, and using assessment on the wolf's fang, learned that it could enhance weapons. The hero sold everything left from the wolves, and although they wanted to kill him, now he had profit. Waking up, he used the skill assessment on the wolf cub and found out that it was a rare ash-gray wolf, whose fur was completely different from the usual. The hero believed that by raising the wolf cub among people, it might not attack them, but he understood. If the adult beast caused harm, he would have to take the blame and kill it. Perhaps in the cub's heart, a thirst for revenge would arise. The world is harsh. The weak always become prey to the strong, but despite this, he swore to raise it differently. The hero decided to sew himself a cloak from the ash-gray wolf's fur. He liked this color, and he believed that the wolf cub would recognize him by scent as one of its own. Sending his companions to the city, he stayed alone with the cub and pondered what name to give it. He gave it the name Ash. The puppy became the first creature that in this strange world he could finally call family, and this realization lay on him as a heavy burden, a new life, trials, and responsibility. Keigo understood that a difficult path awaited them ahead. The hero hurriedly shouted, rushing to stop the little one. Ash was frantically trying to catch a chicken and had already managed to ruin the seedlings. Since then, he had not had a single minute for sadness. He made a vow to the wolf cub's parents that he would take full responsibility for its upbringing. Ash was muddy again. The hero sighed the water would soon run out if this continued. Remembering that Margot had left him a few metal ingots, he decided to see what could be made from them, and after considerable effort, he managed to give them the desired shape. The forging took a long time, but finally everything was ready. He arranged a warm bath, and the hero with relief realized that he could finally take a hot bath. Since arriving in this world, he had only wiped himself with cold water, but now, having a storage system, he could accumulate more water and joyfully exclaimed. The hero rejoiced in the space and tranquility of this place. The air was unusually fresh. Although he usually bought drinking water in the city, for large supplies it was more convenient to go to the lake, and looking around, he noticed nearby monsters he had not seen before, but decided. If they were not aggressive, there was no point in worrying. Turning to the puppy, he joyfully said they would soon collect water. But suddenly Ash tensed, and Keigo also felt that something was wrong. A sudden blow made him reflexively raise his shield, but the force threw him into barrels. Cursing this trouble, he tried to get up. At that moment he realized, before him was a water monster. While the hero was coming to his senses, Ash jumped and clung to his back. Keigo did not waste time. He drew his bow and released a poisoned arrow that hit the creature right in the knee. When the arrow pierced its knee and distracted the monster, Keigo took advantage of the moment. With a lightning-fast attack, he cut off its head. He immediately felt his level rise, but he knew well. This easily won victory was only thanks to Ash. Without him, nothing would have happened. Using assessment, the hero instantly learned. The creature was called Murnum, a water monster that could control water magic. Probably that blow was a spell. If not for Ash's warning, he would not be here anymore. The wolf cub brought him Murnum's scale, and Keigo understood it was saturated with water magic and suitable for enchanting weapons. Since then, Ash became not just a favorite but a true partner for him. Playing a melody, he noticed how Ash listened attentively, as if savoring every note. This touched the hero, and he continued playing with a smile, pleased that even in this world his music brought joy. And later, during bathing, he played with the puppy in the tub. This warm moment became a breath of joy amid hard days. Keigo knew he needed to become stronger to protect Ash, but he was worried about the wolf cub's nutrition. He gave him herbs and eggs, but doubted it was enough. In the city he bought dried meat, but every journey was dangerous in this world. Even everyday tasks became trials. He decided to avoid senseless fights. Today he realized, there are monsters here that can use magic. Just defending is not enough. A weapon for offense is needed. He remembered the new powerful weapon, but rejected the idea. For now it was better to rely on himself. Keigo perceived the meeting with Ash as a gift of fate. At least, he really wanted to believe that. Deep down he was confident he could protect the wolf cub and live peacefully despite all the difficulties of this dangerous world. Now they could take hot baths whenever they wanted, but Keigo's anxiety did not subside. He sighed, knowing he had to wait until everything dried, and looking at the clothes bought in the city, he sharply felt himself in another world. Although nerves prevented concentration, the most important task to stock up on water was accomplished. Today he set out to forge a weapon and began with passionate zeal, although he knew it would not be easy. For several days he practiced on iron scraps, and now he wanted to be sure of his skill before taking on rare materials, wolf fangs and metal obtained by Juno. Finishing the work, he looked at his sword with relief. He wanted to show it to Ash, but the latter was chasing a butterfly and did not notice. Keigo just smiled and began improving the hilt, and when he used assessment, he learned its name. Wolverine's sword, a strong weapon forged from precious iron and reinforced with the fang of an ashen wolf. Keigo was sure that with such a weapon he would definitely protect Ash, recalled the myrna powder and the fire stone, and decided to combine them. Carefully ground the powder and combined them. Fortunately, there was no explosion, but the hardest part was ahead to taste the result to activate the evaluation. Barely touching the powder, his tongue trembled. Invoking evaluation, he realized with astonishment. This was the Thunder Demon gunpowder, which could imbue the weapon with lightning. Realizing that the combination of fire and water produced thunder, he carefully rubbed the blade and checked the result again. Before him lay the Thunder Sword of Wolverine, a blade made of precious iron, reinforced with a wolf's fang and charged with lightning. Pride swelled the hero. Only the handle needed to be wrapped with insulating material, and when he finished, he looked at the sword with satisfaction, and turning to Ash, saw that the wolf cub had already fallen asleep, not waiting for the finale. The hero thought about magic, but decided, first strengthen defense and refine shooting. He felt responsible for Ash, so he had to grow as a fighter. Relying only on poison was dangerous. Sooner or later supplies would run out, so he decided to turn again to Master Kai. The hero asked permission to leave the bow, and hearing an affirmative answer, sincerely thanked. Kai drew the string, aimed, and released an arrow that glowed even before the shot and pierced the mannequin. Keigo froze at the teacher's skill. He knew Kai was strong, but did not imagine it was this much. The master asked to repeat the movement, and concentrating, he reproduced the technique, shouted the command. The system reported a new skill. Charged arrow. The hit was successful, but he understood. Many trainings were still ahead. Kai emphasized defense, not only strength, but also courage is important. Keigo rushed into attack, but Kai's strike was too powerful. He felt it, as if he collided with steel. Despite the burning pain, he activated durability, deciding to check if his defense would withstand the next blow. From the blow, he fell on his back, but a new understanding flashed in his mind. He had just acquired the skill durability, and thanking the teacher, Keigo felt confident. From now on, training would become his path to perfection, and he would definitely manage. Today he gained many new skills but felt tired. Suddenly Sarasa called him and handed over the cloak he had ordered. The work was flawless, and looking at Ash, Keigo realized. This cloak was a reminder of his parents, so he must take special care of it. Sarasa noticed that his shield was in a miserable state, offered a new one. The hero evaluated the equipment, admitted that the old barrel lid was no longer suitable, accepted the replacement, put on the cloak, and looked with satisfaction at his now reliable gear. He noticed how Sarasa gently held Ash and suddenly felt jealousy. For a moment he even envied his own wolf cub, but as if sensing the mood, the little one slipped away and jumped into his arms. The hero smiled, hugged the puppy, and they set off home. Trying on the cloak, he noticed that it looked incredible. The lining had a convenient pocket for a flask. He remembered the myrna powder and tried to cast a spell. After the ritual, the fabric shone with a soft light. Using evaluation, he confirmed the result. Ashen wolf cloak, which now provided protection from fire. By casting a water enchantment on the armor, Keigo felt it become resistant to fire. He knew it was better to have an advantage than to be defenseless, so he decided to enchant the shield, as Wealth-Eyes opened up new possibilities. Looking at Ash, he firmly promised himself to always protect him, realizing how powerless he was without a partner. Training his accuracy, he felt the exercises had become a daily habit, but suddenly Ash barked and distracted him. Turning around, Keigo saw a group of oddly dressed people. His unexpected intrusion disturbed his usual calm. Among the arrivals, he immediately recognized Margot, and Junathi looked very irritated, which made him even more wary. Glancing at the rider, Keigo understood. He was an aristocrat surrounded by adventurers, but what did he want from him? Feeling guilty, he sighed with relief. None of his relatives were harmed. Bowing before the grave, he quietly whispered a few words, laid a flower, and lowering his head, immersed himself in a prayer filled with sincere mourning and bitter sorrow. Earlier, Keigo distrustfully rejected the proposal to go to the forest dungeon, considered himself just an ordinary peasant. Wouldn't an aristocrat with an escort handle a few monsters? But Margot, grimacing, grabbed his face, showing that he himself was not thrilled either, but he could not refuse. The hero realized, now he himself would have to supply the squad with potions. From the conversation he learned the name of the nobleman Baron. He wondered if the monsters there were really that strong, decided to take the opportunity to gather herbs, but everything around seemed strange, as if a play or a scene from a movie. Canine monsters cast magic, tore apart, and killed mercenaries. The event seemed unreal. Meanwhile, the nobleman and his retinue stood safe, only giving orders and not intending to intervene, as if they were unconcerned by the mercenaries' deaths. The hero shielded several mercenaries, saving them from a blow, but in his thoughts he was again overwhelmed by a sense of fatigue from the inequality that had haunted him since the previous world. He realized he could change nothing, especially now, being in the very midst of battle. Activating fortitude, he strengthened the shield, marched toward the monsters, and shouted to the mercenaries to flee. Seeing the enemy slow down, he called again that it was time to retreat, turned around, and ran. The surviving mercenaries hurriedly rushed after him. Having defeated one monster, he rejoiced the level rose. The score showed. Hellhound, a large and insanely fast creature, breathes fire but becomes vulnerable after an attack. Margot grimly noted that going there was pure suicide, and it was then that the enraged aristocrat began to chase them. The nobleman, of course, was fiercely angered by their escape. To calm his wrath, the hero apologized and gave part of the earned money he was satisfied and left, and Keigo realized. In this world, enemies were not only monsters, but also the no less dangerous nobility. Standing by the graves of the fallen mercenaries, he felt the cold truth. Even after this ordeal, death touched only a few, and perhaps if his life had been in the hands of that aristocrat, he too would not have creed. The thought of life in the city was becoming increasingly attractive. But he understood, both in the city and outside it, one could at any time come across a monster in human form, calling himself an aristocrat, so fear was with him everywhere, and he chose peace of mind instead of false security. He did not care that others considered him a weirdo, but Margot approached and, extending a pouch of gold, apologetically asked for forgiveness. Keigo gestured to Juno and Margot that no apologies were needed. He turned around and quickly said goodbye. Not taking the gold, all he wanted was to return home to Ash, but on the way he was exhausted. He ate some gathered herbs hoping to restore his strength, but suddenly felt his body paralyzed. Waking up, he found himself in an unfamiliar place, and Ash was comfortably settled on his chest. In panic, he shouted and noticed nearby Juno, Margot, and Sarasa, who calmly explained. The herbs were poisonous, so he fainted. Realizing the mistake, Keigo apologized they had to carry him when he collapsed. He slept for about 6 hours, and all this time Juno, Margot, and Sarasa took care of Ash and Ronan. The hero again felt that he had caused everyone trouble, but after thanking Sarissa for tea in bed, he smiled warmly, noting that they were remarkably kind people. Sarasa lived in San Diego, and he realized with surprise that all this time he had been at an inn, thanking his friends for their care. He understood he must repay them. He got into a cart and set off home, deciding not to risk the forest anymore, although he knew that the enraged hellhounds would remind him of themselves. Keigo picked up the herb he had just eaten and used assessment. The results showed. It was a green painkiller, super powerful and without an antidote, so he decided that the name fully corresponded to its properties and drew conclusions for the future. He put the prey to sleep with a poisonous potion, but decided not to dissect the carcass until the poison left his body. Tying it to a branch, he noticed a goblin nearby and decided to practice. Before each strike, he activated Fortress and swallowed restorative potions, and the goblin gradually weakened. Eventually, the goblin ran away and did not pursue the retreating one. He tapped the shield with satisfaction, feeling that he was getting stronger, wondered why wolves had not attacked him for a long time, and looking at sleepy Ash, just smiled and petted him. Finishing the work, Keigo joyfully noted that the fire daggers were ready. He also had a few things for sale and a supply of dried venison, and after petting Ash, he smiled and said that this time he would take him to the city as a thank you. Approaching Margot, he sold him the burning daggers and took the payment. He silently stood up, went to the cart, and pointed to one of the items, and Keigo replied that it was intended for Sarasa. But Margot calmly stated that he would buy everything at once, and then, perhaps, resell to Sarissa. The hero instantly guessed that he intended to buy the goods wholesale and resell them, but Keigo did not hesitate for a moment and agreed. Pointing to a barrel of alcohol, the hero added that he also had drinks, and Margot's smile only grew wider. Keigo thought that Margot did not look particularly responsible if he closed the shop so easily, but he was not sure about that. His attention was distracted by Juno, who approached and asked something, and it turned out they wanted to call Sarasa to spend the day off together. When the table was set and everyone was enjoying the drinks, Sarasa suddenly took out a chicken, as if hinting that it was time to make shashlik with vegetables. Keigo immediately got to work carefully cutting the meat and vegetables and skewering them, and the delicious aroma instantly spread around, whetting the appetite. Since he arrived in this world, he had to go through many trials, but even when death was within arm's reach, beside these three he could still smile. Seeing Ash reaching for food, he gave him a piece of dried meat, and that feeling of safety was quite enough for him at the moment. Raising his head, he noticed the beauty of the night sky without skyscrapers, studded with stars and illuminated by a bright moon, and his heart was filled with a strange calm. Stretching, he felt pain in his body after spending the night in the wagon, but looking at Ash, he was reassured he was fine. Smiling, he petted the fluffy fur and noted how cute he was. Remembering the water for the bath, he called the wolf cub, heard a joyful bark, and soon had full supplies. After finishing with the water, he announced that everything was ready and was about to set off, but suddenly heard a quiet growl and saw where Ash was looking. A merman was standing on the rocks watching a giant snake, and the creature had already noticed them, though it was not paying attention yet. With anxiety, he realized that the merman looked like a baby next to this giant. He fell beside Ash and pressed his muzzle to him so he wouldn't make a sound. The awareness of danger made him act quickly. He began gathering things, preparing to flee, but suddenly a strange sound made him freeze. The monster, as if accumulating something in its belly, made a strange sound and in the next moment spat a stream of poisonous liquid directly at the mernom. The caustic poison corroded his scales, and a piercing scream tore through the air. Keigo instantly jumped into the wagon and shouted loudly to retreat, sharply pulled the reins. The horse dashed with all its might to take them out of the danger zone as quickly as possible. For a moment, he remembered the lost tub of water, but quickly dismissed the thought. Now was not the time. Hiding in the hut and burrowing into the hay, he breathed heavily, trying to control his fear. His hands trembled, his heart pounded in his chest, tears rolled down his cheeks, and in his head the same annoying question echoed again and again. What to do now? He firmly believed that an RPG hero would always find a way to defeat any monster, but he himself was just a simple farmer, powerless against such a creature, so there was only one hope: to ask for help. In the guild, he sketched with chalk a giant snake and a mernom in front of it, and asked if anyone recognized the creature. Keigo realized, if it really was a snake, he wouldn't manage on his own. There was only hope that those who could defeat the monster and protect ordinary people from its terrible wrath would be found. Soon an announcement appeared. 5 gold coins were paid for taming the snake, but he firmly told himself not to take on what you can't overcome alone. Life is more valuable than futile risks, so he decided to rely on his own strength and not get into dangerous adventures. Several days passed, and even digging a trench exhausted him to the point of collapse, but he comforted himself with the thought that it was better to do something than nothing. He was lucky experienced adventurers responded to his request and agreed to take on the task, and miraculously returned the lost cauldron. Keigo felt in such moments it was better to rely on adventurers. He did not want cockatrices or hellhounds to come out of the forest and threaten his home, so he decided to entrust them with security from now on. But as soon as he prepared the bath, he noticed Ash's strange reaction and immediately became alert. As soon as he asked what had happened, Ash suddenly jumped up, and a mernom emerged from the water. His heart tightened with anxiety for a moment, but seeing a familiar opponent, he exhaled, not wanting a fight, and decided to test the plan. He drew the bowstring and shot an anesthetic arrow straight into the mernom's shoulder. The arrow hit and the creature immediately began to weaken. Keigo did not waste a second. He approached, and with one precise strike cut off its head. Examining the carcass, he noticed. Despite the strange shape, the internal structure resembled a fish. He wondered if they could be eaten, but now it was time to start disassembling. No wonder mernoms turned out to be needed as ingredients for potions, so Keigo did not miss the chance to ask to be shown how to properly disassemble monsters to avoid mistakes. The new batch of scales he received reminded him of blacksmithing, and if the fire daggers had already become a useful tool, then why not try to create a water one? Interested, he examined the new enchanted dagger and activated evaluation. The blade slowly dripped drops of water from the tip. At first it seemed ordinary, but suddenly a thought flashed in his mind. If you stick the blade into a flask, you can fill it with clean drinking water. Such an ability turned out to be invaluable for everyday life. He wondered how long it would take to fill a barrel for the field or livestock. Although a lot of water was needed, now he had a source, and he decided to forge a few more such daggers for himself and for sale, enjoying the bath and impatiently waiting for it to fill again. He decided to roast the mernom meat, although it already had a pleasant taste on its own. There was no white wine, but fruit beer was also suitable, and the taste came out like white fish, only completely different. Looking around the pond, he saw a bunch of potentially tasty creatures, but restrained himself in time. Snakes lived here. He sighed deeply because he caught himself thinking that he was arguing with himself again. The main thing now was to earn and have money to order new quests at the guild. So looking at Ash, he suggested going to the city tomorrow and selling the daggers, giving 2 to Sarasi, 2 to Margot. And as soon as this was said, both rushed to argue, proving who deserved more. Ash barked loudly and seemed to blow the tension out of the air. This time Margot won, and strangely, their quarrels somehow calmed down. But Keigo noticed Juno aside with a sad look. Something was clearly bothering him, and the hero involuntarily wondered what it was about. Petting Ash, he promised to return when he finished his business. His thoughts carried him to the past. In the trading company, he often dealt with foreigners, but due to the language barrier, he never got close to them. And now, in this world, he still did not dare to let people get too close. But in the new world, connections could be established even without knowing a bunch of words. He was understood anyway, even without precise formulations, and that suited him perfectly. The relationships he had now were acceptable and even warm. He decided to carefully examine the thing Margit gave him. It turned out that the claws of the hellhound were excellent for blacksmithing, and their powder was good for fire spells and resistance to flame. In a few days, he forged a shield and a blade reinforced with these materials, and now his protection against fire became much more reliable. Enchanting the shield for fire resistance and strengthening the metal, he felt ready to face the hellhound. He swung the sword and unleashed a small fiery blast that shattered the chair to pieces, and feeling this power, he became alert. Just then Ash barked, and the prey that he might otherwise have missed fell into the trap. Lately, animals were increasingly caught in his traps with paralyzing poison. Deciding that the rabbit could be processed later, he took on the venison and boar. He was pleased to notice that the bath was almost full. That evening he enjoyed the warmth of the bath and the taste of the meat, marveling at how wonderful it was. He felt that he was finally truly living carefree. He cut a piece of venison, gave it to Ash, and watched with pleasure as he ate. In the old world, he often dreamed of being a farmer, and here that dream came true, although the nobility and monsters always lurked nearby, but his peace was interrupted by the appearance of Margit and Juno. He had already thought that this time they probably would not take him with them, but looking at his friends, he realized they were still going. Then he stopped Juno and handed him some herbs, knowing they would be needed on the road, and Juno gratefully nodded, accepting the gift. Keigo jumped in surprise that Margit stayed, but before he could ask, he silently undressed and got into the bath. The hero sighed heavily and put aside plans to bathe with Ash, because his attention was drawn to the pile of ingredients brought by Margit, and surprisingly, he announced that he was giving everything away. Although the hero suspected a hidden motive, he thanked him because it was too valuable. He told Margit that he was going for herbs and set off with him. Suddenly he felt as if the very presence of his companion strangely calmed him. While gathering, Margit suddenly pointed to the side. Keigo looked there and saw unfamiliar monsters. Without hesitation, Margit ordered him to shoot with the bow. The hero briefly replied, "Okay." After the fight, he felt that his strength had grown a little. Examining the loot, he found out it was a cobalt warrior and a gray bear, dangerous opponents, but ones that could be defeated. Returning home, he again found Margit in the bath, who was laughing loudly, and he only shook his head, marveling at his frivolity. The successful hunt brought them valuable ingredients. Margit decided to process the carcasses in the city. Thanking him, Keigo sent him off and noticed how easily he had burst into his solitary life despite his love of solitude. Now he had friends, and these relationships were warmer and more sincere than ever in the trading company. His gaze stopped on the oil lamp. In the city, they made them based on demon cores obtained from defeated monsters, and he recalled how during a recent raid they got a similar one. The light really seemed beautiful. Meanwhile, Ash was sweetly sleeping on his hand, and the hero, gently adjusting his fur, allowed himself to relax. Sitting down to work, he began to note his observations. Compiling his own encyclopedia, he thought, "If there is no ready book, I will make one myself. Such a reference will still be useful in the city." Thanking Margit in his thoughts for the materials, he resumed work, realizing that the threat had not disappeared and peace could be deceptive. Using strength, he softened the blow of the mernum and pushed it back a little. At the right moment, he cast Roar of Hellfire, but it did not work. Realizing the futility, he took a simpler path, a direct strike, which again only pushed the enemy back. Keigo finished off the mernum with one precise strike of the strike skill. He couldn't help but notice, each time, fights with these creatures became easier. He pondered the interaction of attributes. Water penetrates fire-resistant armor, while fire is powerless against water types. He tried to avoid fights, but understanding the laws of this world was vital. Locking the cart, Keigo suddenly heard a strange sound, looked around, and saw the serpent relentlessly approaching. Realizing the threat, he instantly jumped into the cart, and without wasting a second, ordered the horse to gallop at full speed. All the way, Ash did not stop, barking at the serpent as if trying to drive it away. Keigo thought it was unwise to tease the monster, so he called him over to avoid unnecessary danger. Upon reaching home, he hurriedly locked himself inside the cabin. Hiding inside, he quietly repeated to himself that he had made a mistake. Victories over the mernums had relaxed him and made him forget about a far more dangerous enemy serpent, so he prayed that the creature would not track him, and these oppressive thoughts combined with uncontrollable fear deprived him of sleep all night. The next day he returned to the guild and increased the reward for taming the serpent, but while doing so, he clearly understood. He needed to strengthen the defense and set even more traps around the house. Even after announcing the hunt for the monster, he was not sure that this would be enough to feel safe. He brewed poison from the bile of a gibel and the glands of a cockatrice, which Margot had given him. When it was time to test the potion, doubts overwhelmed him. It was dangerous, but without a test, the truth could not be known. He took a sip and immediately took the antidote, but his strength instantly left him, and he fell to the floor, losing the ability to get up. After drinking another dose of the antidote, Keigo finally came to his senses. Assessment showed that he had been given an extremely toxic donor poison, and the thought that even a drop could kill him took his breath away. He tightly hugged Ash, who was restlessly running around, and quietly apologized for causing alarm. He sincerely hoped that this poison could scare off the serpent. Let it work, he prayed. He set traps, prepared medicine, and thought through defense options, but after the test he felt dizzy, and all that remained was to hope that the monster would not appear near his home. After a sleepless night, he could barely stand, but forced himself to get up. It was morning, which meant he had to take care of Ash. Suddenly the wolf pup barked, and Keigo's heart clenched with anxiety. Grabbing his weapon, he froze, listening to what was happening outside. His body stiffened at the sight of the serpent. Chances of survival were almost none. His heart pounded wildly. His legs were rooted to the ground. The thought of running away flashed, but he understood it was useless. He was already preparing to say goodbye to life when suddenly a group of adventurers appeared before him and Ash, blocking the monster's path. Without wasting time, they launched an attack. Magical flashes burst into the air. Blows rained down on the serpent. The ground shook from the battle, and the serpent, hissing fiercely, lunged at the attackers. Keigo, shocked, froze and could not take his eyes off the battle. This was his only chance for salvation, but his body did not obey. Fear paralyzed every movement. Ash, pressing his ears, growled quietly and did not leave his master's side. He knelt down, pressing Ash. Flashes of magic, the rumble of blows on the scales, the chaos of battle only confused him, and only one thing was clear. He was out of place here, but just then the serpent tensed its body and released a caustic mist from its jaws, a poisonous spit capable of dissolving all living things. One of the fighters managed to raise a shield and took part of the poisonous blow. The barrier trembled but held. He shouted to two sorceresses for help, and they immediately began weaving spells. The serpent, as if sensing danger, tensed its huge body again, preparing for the next lunge. The sorceresses, concentrating all their power, released a spell resembling a fiery whirlwind. Flames rose, enveloped the serpent's body, and in a moment its flesh began to blacken and crumble to dust. The heat was such that even Keigo instinctively covered his face with his hand, and when the flames died down, there was no trace left of the monster. The adventurers, convinced of victory, loudly celebrated how well they had acted in unison. Keigo, still recovering from the ordeal, thanked them, and realizing that turning to the guild was the right decision, watched them with admiration, and understood that he had witnessed a power he himself still lacked. After several sleepless nights, he finally fell asleep, and upon waking went outside and confirmed. It was not a nightmare. Traces of the battle remained everywhere. His traps had proven useless against such a threat, and the realization of how close death had been made him hold his breath. But he and Ash were alive, and that was the main thing. Margot and Juno arrived from the city, having learned from the guild about the serpent, and worriedly rushed to check if he was all right. Keigo tried to speak calmly and thank them for their concern, but the friends suddenly hugged him tightly. The sincere relief in their eyes made him freeze, then exhale and accept the warmth of those feelings. Margot relaxed into the bath, enjoying the warmth, while Keigo meanwhile treated Juno to a drink. Despite the fact that they disturbed his peace, he thought maybe it wasn't so bad. Their presence was cozy and familiar, and sitting nearby, he gazed at the starry sky. Ash, a wolf pup of a rare species, grew extremely slowly. His whole world revolved around his master, and even in his sleep he longed to be near, believing that the most reliable and cozy place in the world was at his master's feet. More than anything in the world, Ash loved meat, especially the kind his master gave him. He had a horse named Ronan and a quirky chicken, which, unfortunately, he could not eat. Once he even brought worms to it, but the master strictly forbade it, and if it was not allowed, then it was not allowed, because Ash was obedient. Every day he was by his master's side in all matters, and once a terrible monster attacked them, Ash, without hesitation, barked to scare off the enemy, and his fierce voice really frightened the attacker. That day the master hugged him tightly, and he felt like the happiest wolf pup in the world. One day an older man and a girl began arguing for Keigo's attention, and Ash could not stand it. He barked, trying to stop them, but the girl grabbed him and held him so tightly that he almost suffocated, whimpered pitifully, and begged for mercy, while Keigo watched with a strange expression on his face that the wolf pup could not understand. He especially loved to sing. Once he and his master sat in the bath and sang together ta-da-dan, enjoying the moment, and Ash felt true happiness. He also loved to run and fetch thrown objects, but he was happiest when it was a bone. After twisting the bone, he always received affection from the master, and that was the most pleasant thing, but although the master was kind, sometimes he was completely foolish. Today there was no water in the bowl, and Ash tried to wake him up, growled, whimpered, even jumped near the bed. Get up. How can you sleep when I have no water? The heat in the room was suffocating, and Ash barely held on. He felt danger in the air, but the master was asleep, and in the darkness something big and long was hiding. The wolf cub growled tiredly, not taking his eyes off the shadow, because he always warned of danger, even when he was afraid himself, and this time he would also protect Keigo and Ronit. The monster lunged forward, but Ash did not retreat. But despite everything, for him the master was the best person in the world. Ash knew, wherever he went, he would always be nearby as a loyal companion and protector. He was Ash, the Ash Wolf, and belonged only to his master. That day Okuda set out into the forest for medicinal herbs. He was accompanied and guarded by Margot and Juno, experienced fighters, and nearby, of course, ran the faithful wolf cub Ash. If he had been alone, he would never have dared to go so deep. Those he trusted were nearby, and that gave him relief and a sense of protection. Margot reported that the target was nearby, and they moved on. Soon a skirmish broke out, which ended in victory without serious losses, and Keigo noted that the fight turned out to be much simpler than he expected, so the victory came surprisingly easily. Margot was the first to notice the enemy from behind and managed to warn the others, but Okuda was still struck unexpectedly. Immediately, new giant monsters appeared, even bigger than the previous ones, and when he noticed a cockatrice among them, despair overwhelmed him. Why was this deadly creature here? He felt a chill inside, seeing how the group quickly changed formation to deal with the threat. This time, he had to take the front line with a shield, hold back the enemies, and give allies a chance to counterattack. When the cockatrice's eyes shone, he realized petrification was about to begin, and instantly activated the skill fortress to withstand the blow and preserve at least some mobility against this deadly attack. He felt his hands start to go numb. In his head, he stubbornly repeated to himself, "Stay calm and drink the potion." As before, Margot timely handed over the antidote. The condition gradually normalized, and he thanked for the timely help. Ash, who was nearby, barked, encouraging everyone. He praised the dog and gave the signal to counterattack. Margot and Juno, acting in concert, immediately supported his pressure. Together, they dealt a devastating blow to the enemy. Perfect coordination and the power of their joint actions even outweighed all the opponent's advantage. After the battle, the system loudly announced a level increase from 12 to 13, and the stats jumped. Health from 26 to 28, magical energy from 16 to 27, endurance from 19 to 21, strength from 25 to 27, intellect from 76 to 77, agility from 31 to 33, speed from 25 to 27. He felt much stronger than before. The awareness of tangible progress inspired him, and at the same time ignited the desire to become even stronger. But he also understood, the main thing is not only strength, but reliable comrades who are ready to stand beside you at the most dangerous moment. Without them, he would not have survived a single battle. After completing the mission, the group returned to the city without losses, and among those greeting them, Sarasa was the first to approach Okuda. He last saw her before the tragic snake attack on his home. He briefly said that despite everything he had been through, he was fine, but the memories still wounded his heart. Inside, however, such satisfaction quietly spread that it was hard to describe in words. The thought of a measured life of ordinary days tempted him, but since he found himself in this world, no day repeated, each brought a new trial. Once he worked in a company, fully immersed in affairs, work squeezed all his time and strength out of him. Saying goodbye to colleagues, he always felt emptiness and silence. It seemed to him that his former comrades were probably having fun and living life to the fullest, while he remained lonely. Despite selfish thoughts, he sincerely admitted that he liked a calm, measured life. The deepest desire of his soul was true freedom. He felt this bitter truth. Even experienced adventurers are not always able to defeat a snake, and an encounter with a dragon would surely mean death for him. He firmly decided to become stronger and survive under any circumstances. Magic seemed a good way to increase his chances. He joked that he supposedly always had strong magic. Although this was not true, the world did not forgive mistakes. He just realized that he has an incredible gift in alchemy and blacksmithing. No other person could create such effective potions and weapons. Even the experienced Margot could not replicate his works. Although he did not possess fire magic, the flaming sword seemed to replace it. It blazed for him and gave the same effect. And although he could not heal with spells, his potions healed wounds and removed negative states. All this became possible thanks to the skill evaluation. He admitted himself that he had previously underestimated it, and by focusing on alchemy and blacksmithing, he finally understood it could become his path to success. Wherever he went, everything boiled down to hard work and perseverance. With these thoughts, he gradually fell asleep. Upon waking, he suddenly remembered that he still had a bow. Later, he went to training, honed his accuracy in shooting, and sincerely thanked his mentor, Master Kai, for support and teaching. In response, Kai shouted, "Pierce," and fired the shot pierced the target through. Kuda instantly realized, this skill increases the piercing power of arrows and significantly enhances their effect. Therefore, it will be especially useful against monsters resistant to magic. Even having power, he knew, dangers still lurk in this world. Just a moment of inattention, and life can end. Kai glanced at him and showed that it was now his turn to shoot. Okuda nodded coldly, took a stance, and focused, mentally ordering himself to pierce the target. He chose a simple but harsh path. Better not to rush into hand-to-hand combat, but to hone archery to strike from afar. Magic would take too much time, so archery became his only chance to survive. Suddenly, the system confirmed success. Kigo Okuda mastered a new combat skill, piercing shot. He understood. Hitting the target on the first try was almost impossible, so he calmly accepted the result, thanked for the experience, and began to get ready to leave. Approaching Dan, he stated that he wanted to submit an official request for subordination, and a thought flashed through his mind that such requests were not uncommon here. Usually he did this when he saw especially strong monsters near his home and felt that he urgently needed support. Looking at the old bow, he saw with a heavy heart how worn out it was and had lost its former strength, so he set off to the weapons shop. He sighed with relief when he finally bought a new bow, but seeing the smiling Margot approaching, he began to wonder what he really wanted to say with that smile. Anxiety gripped him, and in his thoughts he begged Margot not to do anything foolish. Closing the shop in broad daylight and drinking every day was definitely not the smartest decision. He quietly but persistently asked him to abandon such an idea, and added that Margot was distinguished by recklessness rare for the locals. Finally finishing the complex process of creating petrified sand and waiting for the cockatrice's eye to dry, he sighed with relief and heard the system message. A new weapon was created, a petrified arrow capable of turning the target to stone. Suddenly he remembered that he could make poisonous and paralyzing arrows, but decided to keep them separate from hunting ones to avoid accidental use, and just then Ash barked, drawing attention. Okuda became alert, straining his hearing and sight to understand what caused the alarm, and suddenly Fro's nobles were approaching his home again. Baron approached and without choice declared, Okuda must go with them. Kigo's thoughts swarmed like a hive of bees in his head, trying to understand if they really demanded this from him. He bowed obediently, apologized, and showed readiness to obey, but noticed this was not enough for them. He silently extended the coin, as if putting a full stop to the conversation, and the noblemen, without saying a word, turned away and left. Taking a deep breath, he felt that the situation was dangerous, but this time he managed to get out of it without consequences, and he even understood with relief that Margot and Juno were not nearby. He did not want them to see this conflict. Having watched the departing adventurers, he felt sorry for their exhausted and joyless appearance. He wished them a safe return, but quickly dismissed the pity, reminding himself that they were strangers. He was glad that he could replenish the supplies, but there was still work ahead to assess the herbs gathered in the forest, and although he really did not want to test poisonous plants, he knew he had to do it. At that moment, the noise outside distracted him again. He looked out and saw that the noblemen had appeared again near his house. He did not quite realize what was happening yet, but his gaze froze when he saw the consequences petrification had spread over a huge area. Panic seized him. He rushed to look for Perron's potion and fortunately found it quickly. Assessing the situation, he understood. People had suffered from a cockatrice attack. He saw many wounded, and to his great relief, none of them had died. He realized the adventurers had been defeated again and had not reached the dungeon standing among the wounded. He barely restrained his irritation and wanted to shout that they had ruined everything in his district again. The thought did not cease in his head. His barn was not at all a place for a field hospital. He knew for sure the nobleman was to blame for all this, and he must answer for it. Okuda promised himself that next time he would definitely demand compensation. Irritation grew, and in his thoughts he called the nobleman a fool. But despite this, he did not leave the victims. Without help he treated them to drinks, and the grateful adventurers sincerely thanked him. The nobleman hurried everyone, openly showing his impatience, while inside Okuda begged that they never return again. When the commotion finally subsided, he wondered what had happened to the nobleman's horse, but sighing, felt relief from the silence and solitude. Baron, that was the name of the nobleman, from an ancient and respected family that had lived for generations in the city of Leicester. His family had a long, glorious history known to every resident. In Leicester, there was not a single person who had not heard of the famous Baron family. Their name was etched into everyone's memory. Lately, the city had been shrinking more and more from anxiety. Monster attacks had become more frequent, and he explained their activity by the fact that the overcrowded dungeon in the neighboring forest was spilling out dangerous creatures. Knowing that his origin demanded action, Baron felt the full burden of responsibility for the safety of the city and its inhabitants on his shoulders. He fervently believed that the duty of a nobleman was to protect his native city, maintain order, and demonstrate courage by example, so he himself gathered a squad of adventurers and set off to the forest dungeon to drive out all threats from there. To his deep disappointment, the expedition failed even before it began. The companions turned out to be completely unprepared for battle and helpless upon seeing an ordinary cockatrice. These adventurers panicked and scattered. Fortunately, his horse Melty, his most precious companion, returned unharmed. Baron had specially protected her to avoid the risk of death during encounters with monsters. Returning after the unsuccessful expedition, Baron locked himself in his chambers and sank into deep sorrow. For 3 days and 3 nights, his pillow was wet with tears, a sign of unbearable emotional pain. In his thoughts, he begged his beloved to wait and swore that at any cost, he would restore her former appearance, even if it meant spending a pile of gold coins. Baron believed that subordinates were obliged to work tirelessly and multiply the glory of their lord. He considered negligence a grave crime deserving severe punishment, so without hesitation, he ordered the traitors to be imprisoned for a week, considering this a worthy manifestation of noble justice. He confidently believed that it was the nobleman himself who should personally judge those who let him down, and warned everyone, before disappointing him, it was worth thinking carefully. Outside the city lived an eccentric recluse who noticeably stood out among others, and Baron noticed that this man clearly knew his place in society. Seeing that Baron had turned to stone, he was the one who rushed to help and managed to heal him. Unlike others, this man was not just reliable, but truly useful. Moreover, the meat dish he called kunsei turned out to be the most delicious food Baron had ever tasted. Impressed by this, he decided that next time he would definitely make that man his loyal subordinate and go with him into the dungeon for honor and glory, because he considered himself a hero of this land. In his imagination, he already saw battles with monsters and proudly shouted that he would go against them. His loud, resolute laughter echoed in the air, and from his lips repeatedly flew the passionate name Melty. One of the guild employees, named Dan, had been insanely busy lately. Dangerous creatures, cockatrices, snakes, and other monsters that really threatened safety were appearing around the city more and more often, and Dan believed it was all because of the overcrowded dungeon. He was sure if decisive measures were not taken, it would turn into a disaster for the inhabitants, and the surrounding lands. The first warning signs were already showing, and the economy was noticeably weakening. When the threat loomed, the guild decisively supported the adventurers, who took on the burden of exterminating monsters and protecting peaceful residents. These daredevils risked their lives daily for the sake of others. Dan coldly realized no one would show heroism for free, only a fool would risk life without a worthy reward. He really wanted to pay the brave ones properly, but the possibilities were limited. The guild's funds and clients' money turned out to be too modest. He constantly repeated that another problem was a local nobleman named Baron. In his opinion, he was too stingy. Even when the city groaned under the greatest danger and the defenders needed reinforcement, Baron stubbornly continued to cut the guild's budget. Dan was sure if quests paid more, stronger adventurers would come, ready to fight monsters. Victory over them would revive the economy and open the way to establishing taxes. But as Dan said, Baron could not understand even the simplest things. His behavior seemed outright absurd and became a source of constant headaches. In search of a way out, Dan turned to the guildmaster, but their reward turned out to be meager and did not correspond at all to the scale of that threat. Against this background, a mysterious man suddenly appeared, Kigo Okuda. Although formerly an adventurer, he behaved quite differently. He himself placed orders and paid insanely generous amounts for them. It seemed to him that Kigo was closely connected with Margot, Juno, and Sarasa. He often saw them together, and also guessed that Kigo earned extra money by selling various things, although these were only assumptions. The source of income did not matter. The main thing was that Kigo regularly and generously paid the guild for placing orders, so Dan decided to closely monitor the actions of this unusual person and appreciate his support. After the incident with the arrogant nobleman, Okuda reunited with comrades with whom he had endured many trials, and having made sure he was fine, the friends decided to celebrate to relieve tension and feel the taste of life again. He was most surprised by Sarasa. She turned out to be quite willing to drink, drank confidently, enjoying the process and showing considerable endurance. Amid loud laughter, the comrades pressed, "Tell us what happened between you and that nobleman and how it ended." Okuda, as best he could, explained that he bought his peace with coins and asked to be left alone, not to interfere in his life. He spoke the local language crookedly. He was not proficient in it, and gestured energetically, hoping that facial expressions and movements would help convey the meaning, but he himself was not sure how accurately the surroundings understood his words. Yet he noticed that they liked the story laughter, lively faces, and their reactions indicated that the tale evoked a sincere response. The night, which was usually calm and quiet, suddenly became noisy, cheerful, and full of events for him, and surprisingly, he realized that it was not bad, but even pleasantly refreshing. Realizing that the day was over and nothing could be changed, Okuda wished everyone good night, calmly reconciling in his soul with the past. In the morning, when the first sun rays broke through the window, he somewhat awkwardly offered his comrades water and warned them to be more careful after yesterday's drinks. When everyone left, he noted that he had drunk quite a lot, but surprisingly felt vigorous. He thought that alcohol used to affect him worse before, but now, probably due to experience in using the evaluation skill and working with poisons, his endurance had significantly increased. Suddenly he remembered the grass from the forest, which he had not yet tested its appearance, and previous experience suggested that nothing good should be expected, but he still decided to conduct a small experiment. Carefully licking the leaf, he was surprised. No numbness, no pain, no strange sensations. The taste was refreshing and reminded him of mint, which confused him, but the moment of doubt passed. He pulled himself together and activated the evaluation skill. The system, as always, worked precisely. Before him appeared marble grass, an edible plant, ideal for drying and brewing tea. The discovery pleased him, and he decided that next time he would definitely treat Sarah to an aromatic drink. At that moment, he heard the sound of rain, the first rain in the new world. Not wanting to waste time, he headed to the forge to continue working until the bad weather subsided. Soon the system announced the result. A new weapon was created, Hellfire Arrow, of medium power. Okuda sincerely rejoiced after all. He had finally completed the creation of a true elemental artifact. He tried once more, the system confirmed. Water plate was created, an iron plate saturated with the water element, on the surface of which moisture droplets gathered. Now he could enchant not only weapons, but also armor or household items. To enlarge the plate, new scales were needed, those he was to acquire later. She collected water more efficiently than the water blades, and this inspired him. He imagined everyday uses of abilities: a mug that fills itself with water, a frying pan that emits fire, a broom that attracts dust, or a rope capable of petrifying it would be incredibly useful and unique. But despite his dreams, he reminded himself of the most important thing: to live in silence and solitude, far from the hustle, because as soon as he revealed himself too much, he would again be in the sight of the nobles, and he did not want that at all. He returned to work and soon noticed that Ash, enjoying the rain, was completely covered in mud. Thighs made him smile. The dog barked joyfully in response, and Okuda took a deep breath of fresh air and felt a surge of strength. After several days of continuous rain, it finally stopped, and the air was filled with the pleasant smell of wet earth. Blue sky, slow clouds, and soft sunlight gently wrapped him in calm. After feeding the animals and watering the garden, he felt drowsy amid the silence and coziness. Suddenly his attention was drawn to a carriage approaching, and unease awoke in his chest. He felt that everything was going against him. He wanted to believe it was just a coincidence, but soon he heard Margot's voice and the name Baron. The name that was spoken abruptly tore ancient memories from him, although he could not exactly recall where he had heard it before. Then he took out a writing tablet to begin the dialogue. It turned out that the guildmaster had chosen a squad: Margot, Juno, Kaya, and himself to escort this nobleman, and this news did not please him at all. He wondered, why is he so eager to go into the dungeon? Perhaps overpopulation really pushes monsters to the surface, so cleansing is necessary, and Okuda would benefit from this too. His home would become safer. He did not trust Baron, considered him a man without experience and without understanding of power, who nevertheless tries to command and impose decisions. For himself, he called him inept. He tried his best to avoid participating in the expedition, but perhaps alongside the strongest warriors of the city, the risk was lower. He wanted the dungeon cleansing to succeed, so he began preparations. Looking at the guildmaster, he noticed his calm, unwavering confidence. Shiraku sincerely thanked the adventurers for their participation in the recent operation. Realizing that his strength was weaker than the others, Okuda decided to join the support squad with healers and rear fighters. At that moment, Sarasa approached and silently handed him a bracelet. He froze in surprise. Activating the evaluation, he saw the result with amazement. A bracelet with poison resistance that protected the wearer from poisoning. This impressed him, because such items were insanely expensive, so he sincerely thanked and promised to take care of the gift. Suddenly he noticed a strange look in Kai, not hostile, but rather full of tension and determination. Okuda felt that the time had come. He told himself that there were many strong warriors nearby, and if everyone remained calm, even such a danger as snakes could be overcome. But no monster appeared on their path, and this worried them. It meant only one thing: all the creatures had gathered deep inside the dungeon. Reaching the entrance, Baron decisively gave the order to start the attack. The adventurers rushed into battle. Okuda watched with admiration as his comrades acted in harmony. The guildmaster, Kai, and other warriors radiated refined strength. He was in the rear distributing potions to the wounded, and suddenly realized the role of the healer was no less important. If things continued this way, he himself would become a full-fledged healer. But soon his supplies of potions and herbs ran out. The monsters did not retreat, and the fighters' strength slowly dwindled. He looked anxiously at the quarrel between the squad and Baron, silently begging, stop the dispute and give the order to retreat. Fortunately, they finally decided to leave. The attempt to capture the dungeon failed again, although the strongest fighters of the city went into battle. This meant only one thing: next time, they would have to face even stronger enemies. Okuda realized he needed to become stronger. Returning home, he saw a set table. Sarasa had already prepared everything and put a piece of her soul into the dishes. He sincerely thanked her, deeply touched by her care. Okuda suddenly felt that despite the language barrier, they began to understand each other through actions and gestures. Finally, the new potion was ready, but fatigue took over. He exhaled and allowed himself to rest. The night passed quietly, and in the morning he was surprised to feel that he had not been so relaxed among people for a long time. Strange, but pleasant. Soon there was a knock at the door. It was Shiraku. The guildmaster placed heavy sacks filled to the brim with gold coins into his hands. Inside the package there was also a letter. Taking advantage of the evaluation, Okuda read its content words of gratitude and compensation for unused potions. He was impressed, but understood the main thing: his efforts were recognized. Shiraku remembered Margot and Juno, and Okuda guessed that these bags should be handed over to them. He noticed how tired and aged the guildmaster looked, probably after disputes with the nobles. Addressing his still sleepy comrades, he called them to breakfast, deciding that a cup of tea was exactly what to start the day with. Everyone sincerely thanked for the treat. Shiraku, finishing his tea, quickly said goodbye, and Okuda thought that he was probably very busy. A hope flickered in his soul. Maybe even the nobles would finally accept a simple truth: if such a strong team suffered defeat, the dungeon should not be taken lightly. For now, it was possible to feel at least a little peace. Okuda wondered whether to arrange a small feast to raise the fighting spirit. He was glad watching Juno and Margot savor the beef shashlik he had prepared. They looked tired, and that was for the better. The evening was quietly approaching its end. Meanwhile, he finished cooking the soup, sincerely hoping that it would help everyone restore their strength after a hard day. He was already convinced that herb really eases hangovers. Margot, peering into the cauldron, immediately recognized the dish and called it shimi, no soup. Okuda confidently confirmed his guess. As before, everyone ate with appetite, sincerely enjoying every piece. At the end of the evening, he said good night and promised that tomorrow they would meet again. The next morning, he sighed with relief. The soup really helped. Having business at the guild, he suggested going to the city, and they went together. On the way, Okuda admitted to himself that he actually wanted to master magic. He recalled the previous battle when the sorceress tamed a giant serpent with a tornado spell. It was wind magic, an element that always attracted him. He realized that the path to mastering magic requires patience and persistent training, like any skill, and when saying goodbye, Margot expressed a desire to meet again, and Okuda responded with a light smile. Entering the guild building, he immediately addressed and directly said that he wanted to study wind magic. Dan, who was standing at the entrance, agreed and nodded, confirming this possibility. Okuda was stunned with surprise when a dojo opened before him, a place he did not associate with magic training at all. He thought that Master Kai hardly had magical abilities, but Dan knocked on the door and addressed a man named Han, asking him to take on the training. When he heard the teacher's name, his chest tightened with slight excitement. He was surprised that Han, a man with a noble posture and an artificial eye, was to become a mentor, and even more impressed that he turned out to be an instructor specializing in dark magic. Yet Okuda sincerely and seriously expressed his desire to learn from him. He was eager to find out how many battles and sufferings this man had gone through. When Han demonstrated the power of wind magic, Okuda felt genuine admiration. It was truly impressive, and despite his own inexperience, he understood. This was the path he wanted to follow. He decided to start simple, imagining air gathering into a spiral and turning into a typhoon. Focusing, he repeated the spell, directing magical power into the image of wind. After long, exhausting hours of training, he finally managed to activate the magic. The result was weak, but the system reported successful mastery of it and the unlocking of a new skill, wind. Okuda resolutely decided to go further to continue training and become stronger. He remembered that one day he would be able to brew potions himself to maintain his strength, and promised to devote himself entirely to learning. During one of the training sessions, he jokingly called his faithful dog Ash, noticing how much he liked the streams of air from the spell, and suddenly he noticed that a blue wolf had fallen into the trap. Ash managed to react and did not allow his master to harm the beast. Okuda realized that this was the same species to which Ash belonged, and most importantly, the wolf showed no aggression. When he understood that the beast did not threaten him, he let it go and quietly wished that it would not return. That same evening, immersed in thoughts about wind magic, he suddenly realized it could even be used to quickly dry hair. Smiling, he asked Ash if he liked the feeling. Then his gaze fell on the bracelet on his wrist, and suddenly he remembered that he had not thanked Sarosa for the gift, so he decided to call Juno to choose a suitable gift in return together. He suddenly remembered that Juno lived in the tavern where he had once been helped. Finding the way was not difficult. Okuda went down to the bar on the first floor and approached the bar counter. At that moment, a man, having said a few words to the girl, hurried away. Okuda involuntarily wondered if he had become an accidental obstacle, while the girl greeted him warmly. He explained that he was Juno's friend and asked which room he lived in. She answered 202. Okuda climbed upstairs with relief, knocked on the door, and not waiting for an answer, called out that he was coming in. The door opened, and he saw Juno. He looked exhausted and completely drained. Okuda offered him to wash up and showed him how to do it. Juno silently nodded, and Okuda understood that he had been through a lot and decided not to ask unnecessary questions. His gaze caught on a bracelet, and to avoid talking, he wrote on a board, It is worth choosing a gift for Sarosa as a token of gratitude. Juno read it and agreed. When they went outside, Okuda felt a worry arise in his chest for him. Juno's words were unclear, but the feeling was obvious. He remembered his hardest moments, when a friend just sat nearby and listened. Okuda concluded, sometimes people do not need advice, it is enough for their feelings to be simply recognized as real. He felt that Juno had to go through so much. Although I did not understand his words, I clearly saw his pain, sadness, and inner struggle, and that was enough to truly understand. At the end, Juno sincerely thanked for the day and said goodbye. Okuda warmly replied, wished him all the best, and assured that they would definitely meet again. Turning around, he resumed training wind magic, loudly repeating the spell, and apologized to Ash, explaining that he was doing it to see how his power grows. Suddenly Margot appeared nearby and loudly called him. Okuda was surprised and began to wonder why he had come. He guessed that maybe Margot still hadn't thanked for the bracelet that Sarasa gave, and suddenly a bitter thought flashed through his mind about how hard it is to decipher someone's feelings. Remembering that together with Juno they immediately thanked Sarosi, he decided to remind Margot to do the same. Everything that had been happening lately was slowly turning his home, and Okuda thought ironically that his dwelling increasingly resembled a hotel. He recalled how other adventurers, unable to endure the behavior of one of the nobles, abandoned the city and moved their bases to other lands. How did you come to the conclusion that this is exactly what happened in the tavern back then? After all, any sane person would have run as far away as possible from such a disgusting individual. He could not fall asleep. Fear gripped him, and he honestly admitted it to himself. In memory, a period from former life suddenly surfaced, a time when he longed boundlessly for complete solitude. He turned off the phone and silently ignored messages, seeking silence, then again reached out to people and returned to social networks, which he sometimes deleted and sometimes restored. He moved to the village partly because he hated the daily fake smiles at work, wanted to be self-sufficient, and not depend on constant contact with people. Even in the new world, the desire for solitude did not disappear. He thought that seeing someone from time to time and exchanging a few words was more than enough. This happened with Juno, Margot, and Sarosa, at least he himself believed so. Reflecting on all this, Okuda admitted that he could not be sure whether his desire for seclusion would not return. He felt, the greatest enemy of a person is oneself, because thoughts pull into darkness. He realized that he was not seeking answers, but only drowning in a whirlpool of despair. He felt like a fool who invented new troubles for himself, and it was then that he understood that since the beginning of this new life, his old fake smile had disappeared. He felt as if he had finally found something real, and his heart was filled for the first time in a long time with quiet peace. That special bond with the three comrades became a true treasure for him. He was sure they would stay with him forever. The next morning, just after finishing the morning forging, he was about to prepare breakfast when suddenly nobles entered his house. Their appearance was unexpected and immediately caused anxiety. He thought, does anyone really believe that the same squad is capable of capturing the dungeon without proper preparation? It seemed like complete nonsense. He noticed when anger in a person reaches the limit, the face becomes stone, and then all that remains is to put on a mask and smile. A noble named Baron approached and called him by name, and Okuda instantly tensed, trying to understand what exactly he wanted. Bajoran spoke in his language, and Okuda did not understand a single word. And suddenly the incredible happened. Byron had one hand cut off. Even despite the slow pace, the wounds that were eating Byron from the inside began to heal, and he believed that in time everything would fall into place. Memories of his former self frightened him then. After the tragic incident, he lost his mind, but now he believed he was no longer insane. Byron understood the deep torment carried in the hearts of people who lost loved ones. This pain was almost unbearable. Clutching his chest in pain, he remembered those who died because of his inaction, and he desperately wanted to kill his former self. Guilt pressed so unbearably that his body trembled with remorse for the crimes committed. When Shakara saw his son take responsibility and make decisions, he could not hold back tears of joy. Heinrich led the city council with a dignity that was striking. For Byron, taxes and administrative affairs always seemed like complete chaos, but his son turned out to be a true leader. Heinrich proved that he was a strong and worthy man. Byron became more and more convinced that he was unfit to rule. He blamed himself for everything, feared the condemning looks of people, and anxiety only grew within him. Before, he did everything thoughtlessly and felt no responsibility, but now it hung over him like a heavy stone and could break him, yet he sincerely wished to see the city flourishing. Although the peasants thought it better to leave him in madness, he knew it would change nothing. Locking himself in a room would be easy, but it would not help fulfill his duty to the people. Remembering the residents he once wronged, he gathered his last crumbs of courage and promised Shirak that he would do everything possible to revive the city. Although his body still trembled during meetings with people, he had already recovered enough to confidently respond to his own name. One day Shiraku approached him, and bowing his head, apologized. It turned out that his son Heinrich had raised the tax on the reward for killing monsters and had formed an alliance with the guild to solve the city's problems. Baron thought it would be good if his son continued to rule the city, but Shiraku was waiting for his consent. And with that came the bitter realization how much pain he had once caused Shiraku. Shame gripped Baron when he remembered how he had forced the guildmaster to bow before him. Now he finally understood how deep and painful that blow had been. Summoning his courage, he bowed to Shiraku and sincerely repented. His thoughts finally cleared. He saw that Shiraku was worried about him, but he knew that retreating halfway was not an option. He admitted that he had made many mistakes, and the greatest of them was forcing others to bow their heads. Suddenly he realized he still needed to apologize to many among them adventurers whom he had unjustly thrown into prison, and he felt that many of them were still angry with him. Because of his actions, the whole city was in trouble, so when Shiraku hinted that it would be better for him to leave, Baron simply could not refuse. Later he began to feel that Heinrich was increasingly avoiding talking to him. He did not know what his son was thinking, and suspected that he might raise taxes again, but Heinrich firmly declared, the guild's duty is to ensure the city's safety. This decision was born from their joint conversation. Baron was not sure whether his son did it out of respect for him, but he felt he had failed both as a father and as a man. If someday Heinrich followed his path and began to cause people suffering, Baron considered it his unwavering duty to bring him back to the right path. Lester von Baron, although not yet fully recovered, was already able to walk freely among the residents of the city and its outskirts. He went through every quarter and asked people for forgiveness, but quickly realized obtaining true forgiveness is extraordinarily difficult. That is why he devoted all his strength. Baron knew that nothing would change if he locked himself in a room again, so he entrusted the butler to take care of the Mayor Melty and sincerely thanked him for his service. Thanks were also expressed to the guard Tony, who assured that he would continue to diligently perform his duty. Baron firmly declared that from now on he would follow the path of nobility and do everything to atone for his sins. Suddenly a monster appeared and disturbed the fragile peace. Shiraku shouted his name, Juno called to retreat, and Okuda briefly replied that he understood and raised a shield with magic that gave them shelter. Fear gripped him from within. His legs would not obey. He only prayed that the monster would not notice them. Meanwhile, Sarasa hurriedly bandaged Baron's wound and whispered, everything will be fine, trying to calm both herself and the others. After a few days, Okuda finally whispered that they had survived, as if trying to reinforce this thought. Juno addressed him worriedly, and he nodded in response, assuring that he was fine. But in his soul he knew, behind the outward calm hid his helplessness, and at the same time a sharp feeling pressed he must complete an urgent task. Okuda rushed to prepare potions, hoping that they would help at least a little. He felt the bitter truth. Even with magic and medicine, restoring a severed hand was almost impossible, so the only consolation was that no one had died. The smell of blood on his body made him rush to bathe, but suddenly he noticed the fog was thickening in broad daylight. Later he came to the guild and decisively approached Den, asking to raise the reward for the quest. He remembered that the guild had already announced a reward for destroying the monster, but deliberately raised the amount to lure stronger adventurers, and it turned out that the enemy, which everyone considered an ordinary creature, was actually a young dragon. If it had targeted Okuda, he would have died. Inside, the burden grew. How much longer would he live in constant fear and wait for new attacks? Returning home, he nervously checked if he was really alone, convincing himself that there was no one around. He thought about going to Margot, but realized nowhere would be safer, and death would find him anywhere. He decided to stay home and distract himself, but his hands trembled and did not allow him to concentrate even on drawing, and the fog enveloping the house made him wonder whether to rejoice or be afraid. At dawn he realized he had not closed his eyes. Seeing Ash, the happy dog, he thought it would be better to go to Margot and drink to oblivion, and at that moment, a familiar voice sounded at the door. Margot and Juno. Okuda opened the door and admitted that this unexpected visit had really scared him. Margot showed a sheet with a drawn dragon, and then suddenly tore it up, and this sincerely surprised Okuda. Inside, it was as if it cleared up from relief. The danger had receded, and later he realized that the huge lizard, which was considered a spawn of the forest dungeon, had actually flown from distant lands and just accidentally wandered here. It turned out that high-level adventurers had already killed it in another city. Peace finally returned, lightness filled his soul, but deep in his heart he knew new monsters could appear at any moment. As soon as he noticed another creature, he immediately understood. It was a monster that got lost in the fog and accidentally ended up near his house. The system suggested that it was a battle bull, a monster resembling a cow, which lived near water bodies in the Lancaster region. At first he thought it was a cow, but now there was no doubt. When the fear receded, hunger pounced on him. He reproached himself that it was all because of Margot and Juno, who had been too kind to him too often. Perhaps it also happened because he witnessed a nobleman having his hand cut off. He sighed indignantly. The entire kitchen burden was falling on his shoulders again. But he noticed the thick fog had already dispersed. Okuda arranged a real feast. Juicy steaks, hot matsunabe, smoked meat with smoking, liver, and many other dishes. Friends savored, laughed, and spent time in genuine joy. Later they together watched the night sky with enthusiasm. Okuda noticed that Margot was snoring terribly, and suddenly remembered that he had not drunk the shimino soup he had prepared himself. He looked at his comrades and immediately understood they were exhausted. Inside him grew confidence. Finally, he could be frank with them, because a true bond had formed between them, and now they could call themselves best friends. It turned out that the soup did not help at all against the consequences of the night feast. He reheated it again, thinking about how effective those herbs were. When they gathered again, he asked his friends to go with him to the forest to gather herbs. They gladly agreed, and he thanked them from the bottom of his heart. It was strange and at the same time pleasant to feel that even in a forest full of dangers, his heart was filled with peace. They gathered quite a lot of herbs, and the result pleased him greatly. Suddenly Margot loudly called Juno and Okuda. Responding, he suddenly noticed monsters sneaking up on them. Before him unfolded a scene. A blue wolf fiercely fought with another monster. Okuda decided to help from afar, releasing an arrow from his bow. His level rose to 14. He thought he did not want to take someone else's loot, but it was his arrow that dealt the decisive blow. Later, he warmly thanked his friends for their support, and suggested leaving a request in the guild to tame a younger dragon to avoid future threats. Margot accepted this idea. Okuda sincerely thanked them once again and said goodbye. He listened to the buzzing of the beetles and felt peace in it, but thoughts about the future suddenly overwhelmed him, and he cried. He did not understand why he was crying after all. He had not even touched the wine today. He remembered how he once preferred solitude, and suddenly felt the warmth that once entered his heart could no longer be forgotten. When everyone left, loneliness overwhelmed him sharper than ever. He felt a simple truth. All good things have their end, both fun and singing and the cool night wind and the buzzing of insects. Fear gripped him. This lonely night seemed endless. He could not comprehend what was really happening to him. Perhaps it was a reaction to those recent stressful events that deeply shook his soul. To calm down, he took a cup of herbal tea. He understood the reasons for his condition, but did not want to admit the truth. Okuda realized that he had become an adult who could not let go of his own loneliness. Waking up in the morning, he felt his head spinning and his body heavy. A fever engulfed him, and he understood that he was truly ill. He began to prepare food for the chicken, but suddenly his strength left him. Eventually, he fainted. Shiraku, the guildmaster of Leicester, noticed that lately the noble baron had been treating adventurers. Disdainfully complaints were pouring in about Dan, and Shiraku felt he had to talk to him. His position gave him a place in the city council. The guild promised to exterminate monsters and take control of the dungeons. Shiraku explained all the risks and difficulties to Baron in detail. The Baron only pressed, stubbornly demanding to tame the cockatrice. No matter how much Shiraku tried to persuade him, it was in vain. He could not stand aside when adventurers were dying, and hiring new fighters was forbidden. Only Juno, Margot, and Okuda could handle this. Okuda knew how to heal and remove petrification. They had already defeated the serpent, and Kai, a martial arts master, could give a worthy rebuff. No one expected to see several cockatrices at once. Only thanks to Okuda did they survive. There were not enough words to thank Shiraku. Baron, however, offered only 5 gold coins. No adventurer would risk their life for such a pittance. Dan looked at Shiraku with empty eyes, and he was forced to spend his own savings and guild funds to gather a decent reward. After this, Shiraku tried once again to persuade Baron to give in, but each new attempt only undermined his health. Meanwhile, in Baron himself, the emptiness grew increasingly, and eventually he ordered to gather the same group as before. Shiraku was again forced to bow his head and trouble Okuda, begging forgiveness for the surprise. Baron ignored his request. Shiraku painfully regretted that he was such a miserable guildmaster. When Baron dismounted from the horse, suddenly a lesser dragon flew at him and tore off his right arm. Shiraku rushed to defend and finally drove the monster away. Since then, Baron locked himself in his room. The servant brought food right to the door, and he talked to the statue of the horse. This destroyed the city, and his son Heinrich took power into his own hands. Heinrich was the complete opposite of his father, wise and balanced, so Shiraku's restless heart finally calmed down. Baron, a nobleman who lost his arm in battle with a dragon, felt deep fear of the world. He locked himself in his room and stubbornly refused to go outside. To at least somewhat soothe loneliness, he ordered to bring his favorite mare Melty into the chamber. The surroundings began to consider him mad. Baron caught mockery behind his back, and this only intensified his anxiety. Fear crept up on him. He began to fear even birds and insects, and wanted to punish anyone who even seemed to mock him. The loss of his arm made even eating a difficult task, and the voices in his head insisted that he deserved suffering. Baron did not consider himself insane, but honestly admitted he was terrified of everything around him. The servants became cold, and he suffered from insomnia, cursed everything around, and wished to disappear from this world. He no longer remembered when he last got out of bed, feeling as if he was tearing himself in half. In the darkest days, the guildmaster Shiraku did not abandon him. He found a person who could remove the petrification from Melty, and this awakened in Baron the will to live. Sleep problems began to recede, but it was still difficult for him to meet the servant's gaze. A quiet voice gently informed him that it had brought canned peach and wished him a speedy recovery. Okuda responded with gratitude and called her mother. Waking up, Okuda realized with horror, everything that happened was only a dream, not reality. The first thing that flashed through his mind, the fever that had tormented him for several days, had finally subsided, and relief spread through his soul. With anxiety, he realized that he had lain unconscious for several days after collapsing from exhaustion. That day he was busy with the chickens and whispered apologies to them. He did not manage to prepare food before he was exhausted. With a sigh, he added that his health was already returning, and fortunately, no client had come during his illness, but deep down he admitted he was afraid to die alone without help, like in the terrible Kodokashi. His heart clenched at the thought of his mother, who perhaps still believes that he simply left home and abandoned everything. Sorrow and pain intertwined within him when he remembered how dear Marjo, Juno, and Sarah's had become to him. He reproached himself for his helplessness and decided to spend the day in peace, preparing several elixirs. While he watched the potion brewing, a familiar figure suddenly appeared in his eyes: Juno, whom he had not seen for a long time. He came with a proposal to go on a mission, but Okuda explained that he had just recovered and was too exhausted, so he politely declined. Juno calmly accepted the refusal, waved goodbye, and promised to return tomorrow. Okuda wished him luck and left alone, decided that going to the doctor in the city would be a wise step. Later, reviewing his supplies, he joyfully discovered that he had prepared quite a few elixirs. It was then that Juno called him by name again. Okuda was taken aback by his appearance, weary, with a basket of herbs and food. He instantly understood. Juno had just returned from the city and had brought everything just for him. He was touched by this care and thanked him, although he could not repay him only with his own medicines. He invited his friend to stay the night, and joy blossomed in his chest from having a close person nearby. Juno confessed, while Okuda was ill, so many events had happened. Okuda promised himself not to be lazy anymore, but first decided to get a good night's sleep. In the morning, after saying goodbye to Juno, who was setting off on the road, he felt relief after resting and decided to stretch his legs. Suddenly, Baron appeared before him, a nobleman whom he considered an idiot, and this time without the accompaniment of adventurers. Baron bent down and suddenly apologized. Okuda was stunned by this. He could not believe his ears until the nobleman handed him a heavy sack, and he saw, inside there were about 500 gold coins. He decided that this was a kind of compensation, and sincerely admitted, such an act is rare and completely unexpected. Looking at his sincere posture, Okuda believed in Baron's repentance and did not refuse. He decided to treat him to delicious dishes. A pleasant warmth spread through the house, and he remembered that nobles especially valued smoked meat. Tony, Baron's guard, said that now the master had been replaced by his son, and Okuda realized, while he was ill, great changes had taken place in the city. He set to cooking fried hare with garlic, salt, and herbs, putting his whole soul into the dish. Baron's reaction exceeded all expectations. His face shone with satisfaction. At that moment, the dog Ash approached him for treats, and he promised that there would be enough food for him too. Later he noticed that the nobleman with Tony headed not to the city, but to the forest and the stable. He tried to stop them, but quickly got tired. Mentally, he decided that as soon as they woke up, they should be given Shimonos up to recover. And indeed, in the morning he found them in a miserable state, but although surprised, he said goodbye warmly and wished them to take care of themselves. And he himself pondered, now that he had collected a considerable sum, it was time to wisely decide where to spend this money. He set off to a familiar merchant to discuss possible investments, but in the city he ran into Margot, Juno, and Sarasoy. Together they eagerly discussed installing crossbows and building stone walls, and Okuda publicly confessed that he dreamed of a bathhouse and a real bedroom because he was tired of living in a chicken coop. Finally, they agreed to continue cooperation, and this decision gave him a sense of confidence in the future. Thanks to his friends, he finally met with craftsmen and building material suppliers, and also visited a doctor named Kishu-sensei, making sure that medical help was available. He entrusted Sarasa to deliver all the purchases home, both food and materials. To thank them for their support, he took on smoking meat and sincerely treated his comrades. Realizing that returning to a reclusive life was no longer possible, he sincerely thanked them from the bottom of his heart. A few days passed, and he enthusiastically looked around the newly built protective walls, the comfortable bed, and the new bedroom. Now his home looked like an impregnable fortress, and he sincerely hoped that neither snakes nor flying lizards would see him as prey anymore. He felt deep gratitude to everyone who helped him realize his dream. Margot ran up to him and called out loudly. Okuda suggested celebrating the completion of the construction and poured him a drink, to which he immediately asked if Sarasa was nearby. Thinking about it, Okuda decided that Margot was deliberately avoiding meetings with her. Raising his glass, Margot enthusiastically proposed to drink to the successful completion of the construction. Okuda remembered that he still hadn't tasted shimino soup, and recalling the late-night gatherings with a friend until dawn, decided that this was also a great reason for a celebration. He smiled, thinking that they were both hopeless adults. The next morning he woke up with a heavy head and finally realized refusing the shimino soup was truly a fatal mistake. Lying on the ground, he reproached himself in his thoughts for laziness. Several days had passed since the house was completed. The stone walls finally gave him the long-awaited feeling of security, and this protection allowed him to finally relax. He still had quite a lot of gold left, so he was not worried about work at all, and allowed himself to sleep and wake up whenever he wanted. He felt that old dreams were beginning to come true. Waking up at dawn, before sunrise, he felt that he could finally truly rest. He opened his eyes first that morning. Even the animals around were still peacefully sleeping. In these priceless moments of silence and calm, he decided to gather his thoughts together and rethink everything that had happened. He gladly noticed that Juno's feelings for Sarasa were mutual. At the same time, it seemed that Sarasa also felt sympathy for Margot, and Okuda suddenly wondered, had Juno given up trying to win her favor? As for Margot herself, he still turned away from Sarasa's persistent attempts to get close to him. It seemed her persistence was about to bring success. Suddenly, Okuda remembered Baron. The loss of his hand could explain his recent strange actions. Gold given as a sign of apology turned out to be a real salvation. Thanks to it, they built a stone wall and saved him. So he decided not to hold grudges against Baron anymore. Okuda's attention was drawn by Baron's son. The current ruler of the city. Friends said he abused his power, and although Okuda avoided contact with nobles, he was ready to intervene if something serious happened. Familiar faces came alive in his memory: Secretary Den, Guildmaster Shiraku, Master Kai, and Han-sensei, who taught him useful skills. 3 adventurers, a stonemason, and a master, thanks to whom his home became unshakable, as well as Dr. Kishu, Baron's guard Tony, Baker Taylor, and many others, all who cared for him. In the past world, he only survived and did not think about others, but now he finally felt, no matter how stubborn we are, living without human support is impossible, and although he rejected this truth until the end, there were things he did not want to forget. Ash, his dog, was the sweetest and fluffiest creature in the world to him, and he sincerely wished it would remain so forever. Days were getting shorter, autumn was already creeping in, and winter would follow, so he planned to ask Margot to install a fireplace to enjoy a warm bath and watch the quiet fall of snow. The last days were quite ordinary, so he decided, after sleep, he would definitely take a warm bath. In the morning, he remembered the fishing rod he had left somewhere aside, found it, and rejoiced the tackle was still quite usable. Baiting a local worm as bait, he set off fishing. Reaching the river, he sighed with relief. There was not a single monster around. For the first time in a long time, he could finally sit calmly on the shore, when suddenly the fishing rod jerked sharply. The prey bit the hook. It turned out to be a fish called eel, and he decided to taste it if no parasites were found. It could be prepared as sashimi, and finally his experience in fish processing, gained back in Japan, came in handy. Carefully cut the carcass and tasted a piece. The flavor truly exceeded expectations, and the system confirmed that the fish was delicious. He pondered how best to prepare it: marinate, fry, or make sashimi, but decided to catch more, and eventually fell asleep on the shore. Upon waking, he felt joy spread through his chest. Friends were nearby, and everything was fine with them. Kuda decided to stop fishing and move on. Rising, he called his horse Rosinid and set off on the road. Returning home, he was filled with joy. The friends had already arrived. The house was bustling with preparations, and it was fortunate that he brought a lot of fresh fish with him, so the evening promised to be especially tasty and warm, and he suggested raising glasses to this celebration. And so the friendly cooking began. Okuda took up the fish, finely grated garlic, explained where to add it, and himself began making sashimi because no one in the city had yet tasted raw fish, and he was incredibly eager to see the guests' reactions. When finally everything was ready, he solemnly called everyone to the table. They started with shiitake grilled fish with salt, and then served sashimi. Sarasa was surprised by the new dish, and he showed how to properly sprinkle it with drops of lemon juice to reveal the flavor. From the expressions on their faces, it was clear that they were trying this cuisine for the first time, and he was glad to see how they enjoyed it. At that very moment, he noticed Juno looked somewhat depressed. He smiled and offered him some more food, assuring him that its taste would surely lift his spirits. Juno, confused, mixed up the names of the dishes and called sashimi shiitake. An awkward pause hung in the air, but Okuda pretended as if nothing had happened and raised his glass again, maintaining the festive atmosphere. He decided to cheer up the company and congratulated Margot and Sarasa. Their behavior the day before hinted at a quick wedding, which everyone felt, and indeed the couple confirmed the news and thanked him for the kind words. He learned that the ceremony would take place at his house in just 2 days, and only the closest would be invited. Okuda noticed that this news depressed Juno even more. However, looking at the guest list, he saw the name Elsa, Juno's beloved, and froze at the realization. Juno already had a girlfriend. This meant that yesterday's conversations and sympathy were in vain, but he was not angry. On the contrary, his heart was torn with sincere joy for his friend. After the evening, Sarasa thanked him for everything, and they parted ways. Left alone, he pondered how to celebrate his best friend's wedding. There were 2 days left until the ceremony, so he immediately began preparing dishes and even sacrificed a few chickens. The wedding day arrived, and the morning fishing was incredibly successful. He prepared yakitori, putting his warmth and care into each piece, and was especially proud of the breaded chicken, which he considered a dish of the highest class. Only fresh fish remained to be prepared. And at that very moment, when everything was almost ready, those everyone was waiting for appeared Margot and Sarasa. Together with them came Juno and introduced his companion, Lady Elsa, whom Okuda met warmly and kindly. A sudden feeling of familiarity flashed in his heart. She turned out to be the daughter of the owner of the tavern, where Juno lived. Okuda realized with surprise how lucky his friend was. Elsa was not only beautiful, but also truly kind-hearted. He rejoiced wholeheartedly for Juno, because he knew what trials his comrade had to endure. Having congratulated his friend on this event, he immediately immersed himself in the final preparations for the celebration. But suddenly, as if from nowhere, the son of Baron appeared. When he appeared, everyone froze in astonishment. This was Okuda's first meeting with this man, and he quietly noted this to himself. When Margot paled at the sight of the guest, it became clear his arrival did not bode well. Even without understanding all the details, Okuda felt one thing: only a heartless person could do such a thing. Blue Wolf, a proud hunter of wild thickets, free and stern, he was born in a pack ruled by a wise and strong leader, and between them burned loyalty and brotherly spirit. But one day a strange and powerful man appeared with a power the wolf had never seen. He was of noble lineage and possessed foreign magic, defeated the leader in a brutal duel, and taking his puppy, left, leaving the pack orphaned. The wolf understood. If he had attacked then, he would not have survived. Death would have been inevitable, because against such magic he was powerless. When the leader was gone, the pack lost its way, and the fate of the puppy fell into the hands of a human. At first this was frightening, but over time the wolves understood. The stranger did not harm the little one. On the contrary, he protected and cared for him as if he were his own child. The world they lived in was cruel. Only the strongest survived here, and no laws could change this order. But in the heart of the loyal beast, another feeling awakened: respect. Realizing that resistance was futile, the blue wolves chose a different loyalty from then on. They watched the puppy and his new protector from afar. They did not intervene directly, but hurried to help as soon as danger arose. From time to time, they drove away wild creatures that could cause harm, but one time everything changed. One wolf came too close and fell under the influence of strange magic. Losing control, wounded and already resigned to fate, he suddenly saw a grown puppy before him, and without thinking about his own safety, covered it with his body. The beast's heart was pounding wildly. In a world ruled by the law kill or die, such an act was unheard of. The Manthai's strange, almost alien werewolf did not turn away but healed his wounds, showed care and compassion, proving that before them was not just an ordinary mortal, but a being of a different, higher kind. Another time, when a man with a puppy went fishing at the lake, their peace was suddenly disturbed by a bear attack. Then the blue wolves rushed into battle and, giving their last strength, drove the beast away. Turning back after the clash, they saw a touching scene. A tired but intact puppy peacefully resting in a person's arms, and even the stern hearts of the forest warriors trembled at the sight. When the wolves returned to their lair, they found it empty. Only fresh fish and a wooden bowl with a drink lay there, as if in thanks. It was a sign the man knew about their help and sincerely appreciated it, and the wolf admitted his defeat not in battle, but before the humanity and kindness of this extraordinary creature. And since then, despite the years, the blue wolves continued to guard the lands where this man and his ward lived. In their hearts burned the hope that the puppy would grow wise, and just for wolves are not just beasts, they are intelligent, proud, and capable of feeling. Elsa ran a tavern and bar in Leicester Place, where the fates of travelers, craftsmen, and adventurers closely intertwined. Thanks to sensitivity and practicality, she managed to create not just an establishment, a real home for those who had no roof of their own, especially for poor adventurers whose lives always balanced between victory and death. For them, Elsa's tavern became a refuge where one could find warmth, food, and compassion. Among the regular guests was Juno, an adventurer with a kind heart and unbreakable spirit. Elsa had known him and Sarasa since childhood, and over the years her warm feelings for him turned into true love, but Juno's heart belonged to another Sarasa. Elsa felt it immediately. Without error, a person in love notices even the shadows of someone else's affection. The realization struck with pain, sharp and silent. Sarasa herself reciprocated Margit. He was a skilled blacksmith and a talented merchant. And despite her own pain, Elsa admitted they truly suited each other. Meanwhile, Juno suffered. Love was tearing his soul apart. He was losing weight, becoming alienated and gloomy, distancing himself from everyone. His body weakened, his spirit faded, and Elsa tried to support him, cared for him, fed him, and begged him to at least eat. He pushed her away and sometimes spoke harshly. She still stayed close, endured, and did not leave. Her love demanded nothing in return. It simply existed. Every morning Elsa stood before the mirror and admired her freckles, the very ones that once moved Juno. She knew that Sarasa was not only beautiful on the outside, but also a kind and worthy woman. But despite everything, Elsa's heart tore with jealousy and bitterness, with a burning desire to become the one to whom Juno would give his soul and love. And then everything changed. When Elsa was almost giving up, Juno spoke the words she had waited for all her life. He wanted her to become his girl, and her tears broke down the last barriers. An honest conversation revealed to her how Margit managed to release the spirit of his late wife Isabella, and Juno found the strength to give up hopeless love for Sarasa. Although a shadow of unrest still smoldered in the soul because of his past, there were no more secrets between them. He knew about her feelings, and that made Elsa truly happy. It was the brightest day of her life. On the wedding day of Margit and Sarasa, Elsa dressed in a special dress, wore the same shoes she had saved for a big event, and put on earrings gifted by Juno. She did not hide her freckles. Juno said he liked them, so Elsa for the first time decided to remain herself and fully accept her appearance. The wedding took place in Okuta's house, and Elsa saw again the man she once met in her tavern, black as night hair, warm gaze, and a funny puppy forever etched in her memory, and now her heart was filled with joy and anticipation of a bright future. Meanwhile, in Leicester, power fell into the hands of a new ruler, Lord Heinrich, the son of the former tyrant. To step out of his father's shadow, he persistently tried to win the hearts of ordinary people and the favor of influential citizens, gradually strengthening his position. The residents began to call him wise, and he basked in power, knowing that his decisions were creating a new reality. To retain power, Heinrich imposed heavy taxes on the people and drove them to exhaustion through labor. When his father tried to regain control by raising levies for the guild and the army, Heinrich decisively crushed his ambitions and firmly established himself as ruler. Studying the city's economy, he came across Margot's shop, where fiery and watery daggers were sold, which breathed life into the market. Heinrich, wishing to exploit this, decided to subordinate Margot and his activities. But from reports by subordinates, it turned out that the shop no longer traded such blades, which led Heinrich to think about a hidden source. Seeing the closed shop and Margot's wagon leaving with companions, he realized they were heading straight to him. Heinrich ordered 4 of his men to follow them, hoping to track down those mysterious daggers. He burned with determination to make Margot pay and gain double profit. Impressed by the development of events, Okuda tried to understand what was happening. His outrage peaked when a stranger entered his house without an invitation. He called the guards, but in vain. Realizing that arguing with a higher-ranking person was pointless, Okuda sighed and decided to ease the tension by treating the unexpected guest to sashimi. At that moment, Baron appeared and addressed Heinrich, and Okuda suddenly understood standing before him was the son of that very nobleman. Suddenly he realized their conflict had a family undertone. Understanding the significance of this moment, he asked everyone to calm down and listen to him carefully. Baron tasted the sashimi and was pleasantly surprised by its flavor. Margot confirmed it really was sashimi, and Okuda sincerely rejoiced that the dish was liked, so he offered to treat the other guests. Realizing that the more people, the merrier, he invited Heinrich to attend Margot and Sarasa's wedding, and he agreed. Margot sincerely thanked Okuda for his help, and he replied, it was not difficult. Okuda noticed with surprise that he suddenly had so many helpers, but now was not the time for quarrels. Preparations for the celebration were in full swing, and finally, the long-awaited moment arrived. When they entered the hall, Baron addressed Margot and Sarasa in a lofty, solemn voice. Okuda noticed with surprise that he rarely saw Margot in a jacket, and the moonlight-colored dress further emphasized Sarasa's beauty. The lovers exchanged vows and put rings on each other's fingers. The guests instantly burst into congratulations. Okuda suddenly realized he had never seen such a wedding in this world, and the strangest thing was that everyone sincerely smiled, not even noticing it. The atmosphere quickly changed, and the celebration exploded into a loud feast. Okuda brought out sashimi and chicken, invited the guests to help themselves, while two men demonstrated a strange art that caused him genuine amazement. He recalled old banquets from his trading days, when they arranged games with stockings on their heads, and this memory made him feel disgusted. He was glad that such trials were not here, but still he was troubled by the absence of a wedding song. Stepping onto the stage, Okuda announced that he would sing himself, and his song carried loneliness, anxiety, and pain from how friends drift away, searching for their place in life. Okuda said that even without knowing the language, one can feel the meaning of the song with the heart. After finishing the performance, he once again sincerely congratulated the newlyweds. After the celebration, Sarasa and Elsa said goodbye, promising that they would definitely meet again, and Okuda sincerely wished them all the best. Margot, Sarasa, and Elsa set off home, while the other guests, quite tipsy, stayed. Okuda, sighing, dragged them to rest, jokingly threatening to throw them into the oven for such revelry. Later he felt how the night wind refreshes, and as if blows away all the fuss, leaving the feeling that it was only a dream. Deeply pondering his path in this world, Okuda quietly admitted that people often contradict themselves. Closed off, they moved toward their own disappearance. But despite this, he found friends with whom he wanted to share the best moments of life: Margot, Juno, Sarasu, Elsa, and of course, Ash, the sweetest creature in the world. The happy smiles of the newlyweds warmed his heart, and he, along with everyone, bathed in the glow of this circle of joy. He thought words can be both a blade and a mirror. Sometimes they hurt, sometimes they reflect the truth. Earlier he avoided this, preferring to solve everything on his own. But now, amid battles and dangers, under the glow of the blue moon, he asked himself if this was all a dream, where contradictions suddenly become understandable. He decided not to rush, to slowly open up to people and enjoy what he had. New difficulties lay ahead, but he awaited them calmly. A smile touched his lips, and he suddenly realized that he himself had always been a contradictory person. He suggested postponing the cleaning until tomorrow, and just resting today. The friends were too noisy. The joy of being able to make others happy became an even more valuable reward for him. The day after the wedding, Okuda again took up training in wind magic, diligently striving to strengthen his skills. While others were still recovering from yesterday's festivities, he had already plunged into his usual routine. Suddenly, Esha's loud barking made him instantly alert. Okuda turned around and a giant serpent appeared before him. Without hesitation, he decided to act. There was no help coming. He tried to attack with the spell Piercing Arrow, but it had no effect. Using his scanning skill, he searched for the monster's weakness. The system notified him that his level had increased, and the scanning skill reached level 2. He learned that the serpent had deadly poison that corrodes everything, but it had no protection against toxins, and this prompted Okuda to use the poison against the monster itself with the help of a wind spell. At that moment, a blue wolf burst in to help and distracted the serpent, and Okuda instantly realized this was a chance for a counterattack, tremblingly watching every move of the enemy. And as soon as the serpent opened its jaws, a gust of wind caught the poisonous breath and threw it back at the monster itself. The serpent convulsively curled up, several scales fell off, exposing a vulnerable spot. Okuda did not miss the opportunity. With one decisive sword strike, he finally defeated his opponent. When the dust of battle settled, the system announced Okuda's level had risen to 15. He thanked the blue wolf for the timely help, and with relief confirmed that he was all right. When Juno learned about Okuda's feat, he could not contain his amazement and sincerely admired him. Okuda himself, still stunned by what had happened, cleaned up the battlefield together with Juno and gave the serpent's body to the city butcher, and soon Elsa appeared, worried about Juno's condition after the celebration. Okuda noticed her dissatisfaction and thought that she was angry because Juno had left her alone. He sincerely hoped that they could reconcile. Reflecting on recent events, Okuda could not calm his mind with the thought of what the dragon scale could be turned into, and he was also troubled by the very appearance of this monster in these parts. He felt that the dungeon was once again teeming with monsters, and that one cleansing might not be enough. Okuda admitted that he was simply lucky, and that without weapons everything could have ended tragically, so he rushed to hone his skills in magic. He approached Sensei Kai and Sensei Kan, and with hope in his voice, asked them to train him. Most of all, Okuda wanted to master wind magic. He understood well that without experience it could not be perfected. He believed that someday he would be able to use powerful spells like a tornado if he mastered the basics perfectly. The next step, he considered, was unarmed parrying and several martial arts techniques. Kai showed him several strikes and movements. Okuda mentally exclaimed that he was not capable of repeating that, and asked to wait. He was outraged that no one understood how he had even lived to this age. He did not want to die while mastering new techniques, but he understood there was no choice. The system announced that Okuda had acquired a new skill, Moonflip, and he, exhaling, realized with surprise that it had succeeded on the first try. He did not even expect that so much would have to be learned in this world. Convincing himself that there was nothing to fear, Okuda decided to move on to the basics of other elements. He recalled that there were only 6: fire, water, wind, earth, light, and darkness, and pondered how useful light could be at night. He was troubled by the question, how far could one advance in mastering light magic? Meanwhile, he noticed that the dragon carcass had already been taken apart. The butcher said enthusiastically that the meat turned out to be surprisingly tasty. Okuda thanked him, asked if it was really that good, and offered to sell the meat. However, knowing the origin of this dish, he somehow did not want to taste it. The news that the meat costs a whole 8 gold stunned him. He took with him the scale, fangs, and poison glands. The butcher said goodbye, and Okuda sincerely thanked for the help. He guessed that the demand for scale armor is high now, so he decided to sell the prey to Margot and set off to his house. Seeing the scale, Sarasa exclaimed in surprise, and Margot immediately declared that he would buy it. Sarasa objected that it belonged to her, and Okuda, confused by their dispute, decided to make the scale a wedding gift. Understanding that the newlyweds were enjoying their honeymoon, he decided not to disturb them and gave the scale for free. When he was about to leave, Sarasa stopped him and handed over a bottle. He recognized in it the same liqueur from the wedding, and although he said that a gift does not require thanks, refusing would be impolite, so he accepted it with sincere gratitude. At home, he thought with pleasure, this drink is truly wonderful. But soon sleep overcame him. He thought the day had been extraordinarily eventful and felt heavy fatigue. Hugging the puppy Ash to himself, he gently whispered that she was a real good girl. Okuda smiled proudly. The she-wolf's fang had become a worthy necklace and would now serve as his talisman. Taking the dagger in his hands, he pondered the future enchantment and decided that the element of water would suit best. This thought brought a sincere smile to his face. He was glowing with joy when he realized that he had finally mastered the art of enchanting, although usually Margot did this. Suddenly Juno's voice rang out. He called Okuda. He flinched from surprise, admitted that he was scared, and asked what was going on, and Juno gestured that there was something important. At first Okuda understood nothing at all, but looking closely at the gestures, guessed it was about drinking and about a girl. He decided that his friend was calling him to the tavern, the place where one can relax and maybe even meet someone. Juno said he was heading home and would return in the evening, and Okuda hesitantly agreed, although in his heart it seemed to him that this was not at all like his friend's behavior. He felt that Juno was hiding something troubling because he did not just want to drink for the sake of conversation. Okuda remembered how he himself used to like to drink after a tiring workday. When it got dark, he decided not to take the puppy Ash and left him in Sarasa's care. When he arrived in the city, he realized he had done the right thing. Margot had just returned to the shop, and the conversation was about the delivery of daggers. Margot thanked him and invited him inside, but Okuda said he would return later and went on. Margot just nodded, not objecting. Approaching Sarasa's stall, Okuda called her by name to get her attention. He immediately noticed there was no joy on her face, and he instantly doubted whether he had chosen a bad moment. But as soon as she saw Ash, her mood immediately changed. She gently called him and was touched by the fluffy puppy. Okuda, with a slight smile, asked her to take care of the dog and explained that he wanted to spend some time with friends. He felt he should be honest, so he explained with his hands, saying it was about fun, alcohol, and possibly girls. He instantly noticed how Sarasa's facial expression changed and realized he had made an awkward mistake. To soften the impression, he placed a coin, saying it was compensation, and once again asked to take care of Ash. Finally, he joined Margot and Juno, sincerely thanked them for waiting, and with a smile noticed that they had already started drinking. Margot handed him an invitation, and Okuda, a little frightened, still agreed. He thought that the tavern might become the place where he could finally relax a bit and discover something new. The tavern, called the Cradle of the Butterfly, turned out to be the meeting place. Okuda noticed that the room was simply arranged, without any luxury, and this surprised him. He wondered if they had come here just to eat, as the establishment reminded him of places from the old world. Although he did not expect to end up here, he still decided not to distance himself. He froze in surprise. Each of them had a girl beside them. With a smile, Juno wished him luck, but Okuda did not immediately understand what for. One of the girls invited him to sit next to her, and he mentally noted that he had gotten a calm and beautiful interlocutor. Okuda greeted her, sincerely glad to meet, and the girl replied, reminding him that it was already evening. He suddenly remembered that it had already gotten dark long ago, and a quiet excitement trembled in his heart. Due to the language barrier, he suggested corresponding on paper. She agreed and wrote her name Urina. He treated her, eager to show attention. Urina thanked him for the kindness. Okuda felt as if he were that academic accountant who hastily learned foreign words during business trips, but here everything turned out to be much more complicated than just language. He thought that Margot and Juno deliberately brought him here so that he would better master the local language, but in his soul, he dreamed of something completely different and could not get rid of the thought of how their evening was going. Turning his head to Margot, he saw an unexpected and strange scene that immediately stirred him inside, and he thought that if Sarasa found out, she would tear Margot to pieces, but he decided that it was still his personal matter. He again turned to Urina, pondering which topic would be better to choose for conversation, and suddenly his attention was drawn to the music that sounded in the hall. Hearing the bardic singing, curiosity about the content of the song flared up in him, and while he continued corresponding with Urina on paper, Okuda applied his evaluation skill to decipher what was written. It turned out that it was about a distant western mountain where a giant tree has been growing for 10,000 years, and at its root blooms the Urian flower, which shines brighter than the sun. Around this sacred tree stand divine beasts on guard. According to legend, the nectar of this flower can cure any disease. If mixed with the rare herbs Irene and Malin, and a hair of a divine beast is added, an elixir of incredible power is obtained. Kuda noted that what he heard was very interesting and valuable, sincerely thanked Urina, and thought that bars and girls really can become the best language teachers. He remembered a friend's words. They turned out to be true. At the end of the meeting, the girls said goodbye and invited him to come again. Margot promised to return, and Okuda also felt the desire to see Urina once more. As he left, he said that the evening was wonderful. He realized everything happened exactly as Margot and Juno had planned. The friends were worried he hardly ever talked to women, and he himself would never have dared to come here. He was sure he met Urina only thanks to the care of his friends. Returning, he gently addressed the puppy Ash, wondering how it ended up nearby. Suddenly Sarasa and Elsa appeared before him, and Okuda felt the air around change. He immediately announced that he was going home to sleep. However, Sarasa sharply grabbed him and Margot, and without saying a word, pulled both of them home. Okuda mentally apologized to his friends, convinced that he was to blame for everything. He felt embarrassed. He had done nothing wrong but still felt guilty. In his soul, he reminded himself that he had the right to remain silent. Margot and Juno bowed their heads low before the women, whether out of respect or remorse. The atmosphere gradually calmed down, and meanwhile the puppy Ash sniffed something strange. Okuda asked what exactly it was looking for. The dog put its paw into Margot's pocket and pulled out some object. It turned out that it belonged to one of the girls in the tavern, and Sarasa immediately became alert and asked where the item came from. Anxiety flared up in Okuda's chest. He thought this was the end, and that retribution would catch up with him here and now. But Sarasa suddenly, decisively, declared that he could go. Okuda seized the chance to leave without consequences, thanked them, and said goodbye, sincerely apologizing. He decided that now the most important thing was to return home as quickly as possible, because staying here meant ending up on the battlefield. While fixing the roof, he suddenly smelled a strange, pleasant scent, and since then he could not get it out of his head. He thought that this was love. If that was really so, then the feeling would quickly pass. Romance never lasted long with him. He finished the work and noticed that evening was falling. The tavern should have already opened, and although he convinced himself that there was nothing to do there, the temptation to try drinks and at the same time learn the language still pulled him. Finally, he dared. A trip to the tavern might be useful, even if it brought trouble. He went in and bought souvenirs that the girl liked. She said with a smile that it was a wonderful snack for drinking. Since then, Okuda began to visit her often, sincerely enjoying it. The more he enjoyed, the more often his thoughts brought him back to reality. Once he was popular with women, but he built walls around his heart, hurt those who became close, and hated himself for it. He longed to know if Urina suspected his feelings. She sincerely engaged in conversation, not only entertained, but also listened attentively to him, and he saw that she really felt good next to him. To him, she shone like a star. He passionately wanted to learn more about her and was ready to reveal his secrets to her. She agreed, and Okuda was impressed. Their meetings filled him with some deep fullness. He returned home, thanked the man who took care of Ash, and heard in response an offer to light a fire. Autumn was coming to an end, and winter was approaching so cold that diamond dust could be seen in the air, and Okuda realized that he had to prepare for severe frosts. He began to rewrite today's events into a book, sure that Yurina would be impressed, as she was curious. At the end, he signed, "For Yurina from Keigo Okuda," and knowing that the gift might seem simple, he still decided to give it. He lit the stove, and the house filled with warmth. Now winter could not be feared, because he felt cozy and calm. Time passed, and Okuda came to Yurina with a book he made with his own hands. The girl was impressed, and the boy was even more surprised when she also handed him a book. It was a whole set of winter clothes, typical for their region, and she insisted that he try it on right now. Okuda admitted that the clothes were strangely warm. Yurina praised that he looked great and asked to see the book, and after reading a few lines, she exclaimed excitedly that it was incredible. At that moment, he felt that his work truly made sense. She read eagerly, then gave him her grimoire book on the basics of survival and ice magic. She leaned in very close, explaining what was written, and he concentrated hard trying to understand. Thanks to this, he created ice for the first time and even threw a few cubes into a drink. Joy overwhelmed him. The system notified him of a new skill, freezing, and he realized that books could grant new abilities. He finally understood how Yurina made ice stones, so he decided to try again. The result depended on the effort and concentration spent, and this time he managed to cool her glass. The girl thanked him and suggested reading together, and he felt so warm because she was truly interested in his book. Time with her flew by unnoticed and easily, like in a soft dream. Later, he returned to Juno, sincerely thanked her for taking care of the puppy, and headed home. At night, lying in bed, the harsh words of his former boss echoed again in his mind. Being late is the same as killing, because in the past world he believed that his negligence took people's lives. Here everything changed. When he talked with Juno, Margot, Sarase, and Elsa, even the pauses seemed part of friendship, and his thoughts returned again to Yurina. He finally understood. It was not about taking time away, but about exchanging life, about sharing it with others. Perhaps this was his true destiny. His own words sounded too romantic, thoughts about the girl tangled in a labyrinth, and he honestly admitted to himself. He liked her, though he did not understand why love was so complicated. The next day he set off to the city for winter clothes and decided to give Yurina another gift. It was a water dagger. The girl, still impressed, asked if he really wanted to do this and promised to take care of it. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by voices, and Okuda thought that from now on he should always carry a weapon. He did not dare to ask if she had received other gifts from visitors, but the thought made his heart heavy. The training exhausted him, yet he firmly decided to become stronger. The puppy began scratching the wall, so Okuda decided to check. Behind the wall, there really was a bear lurking, but not an ordinary one. He immediately used the evaluation skill. Before them stood a red-haired grizzly, a rare beast with the fire element. Water is the best weapon against it. Okuda loaded the crossbow and aimed. The arrow hit, but he still did not understand if it was enough. The grizzly lit up and approached closely. At the critical moment, he managed to pierce its head and finally defeated it. The level rose, and now he could turn the prey into food. The meat turned out to be surprisingly tender, much tastier than bears from his world. When he cooked a dish with an egg, a lightness spread through his body. It was the effect of the new potion. Elixir of Idru, the strongest restorative drink that even restores body parts. Okuda hesitated. He knew what it was made of, but eventually gave the Sarasi skin and set off to the city. Taking a small bottle, he took the Sarasi skin, asked to sew a blanket, and filled with excitement, headed to the residence. He froze before the possessions of Lord Baron. The guard Tony recognized him and led him inside. In the office, they asked him to look out the window, where the master was walking. It seemed he had too much free time, like a retired lord. Tony explained that after the walk, the lord would receive him. Okuda took out the bottle and wondered if the elixir's effect would really work. When Baron returned, both he and Tony froze in shock. They could not believe such a potion existed. Tony immediately urged him to try it, and Keigo hesitated. He felt its value and knew otherwise nightmares would torment him. Baron immediately felt a surge of power burst within him. And indeed, the master's right hand began to heal. Okuda decided to remain silent about the ingredients of the elixir. As soon as he finished his business and was about to leave, Baron stopped him with a sharp movement. Refusing would be rude, so he accepted the gift money, because to survive, at least some resources are needed. Winter was already creeping in, and the boy thought about future battles with monsters, hugged Ash, who was afraid of the cold, and imagined playing snowballs in winter, and even becoming Santa for Yurina. Christmas did not exist here, but he desperately wanted to create a holiday. Curiosity pushed him to check if the blanket was ready. He went to the shop and asked the girl to keep the change. In fact, he just did not like dealing with small coins. He grabbed the blanket and headed home. The stove was blazing, warmth wrapped around him, and he decided that now he would survive even the harshest winter. He was playing with Ash when suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was Juno and Elsa. It seemed they came only the two of them for the first time, and the boy decided to treat them to rare bear meat. The dish pleased everyone, and Kigo poured juice for Elsa, remembering that she does not drink, and served a stronger drink for himself and Juno. He jokingly thought that the tavern owner could not resist alcohol, and suddenly both turned to him simultaneously with serious faces. Juno spoke first and directly asked if he was dating Urina. Kigo, embarrassed, thought they had come just for this question, so he dodged and asked what exactly it was about. Juno caught the hint and did not raise the topic again. Time passed, the guests began to leave, and Kigo sighed with relief even without visiting the tavern. The evening turned out to be calm. He took up the household chores, prepared barrels for winter to make it easier to melt ice and fill baths faster later. Finally, he allowed himself a warm bath. His thoughts wandered in movies. Love seems simple, but in reality it requires daily work. The whole day passed setting up the bathhouse, and the next morning greeted him with cold. While working, he recalled the words of his former boss about compromises. Could it be that life for others means only sacrificing oneself? He firmly believed that he had the right to live as he chose. Here, survival is more important than romance, but he constantly thought, if the dragon appears again, will he be able to protect Yura? Doubts gnawed at his soul, and yet he handed Margot a new dagger and signed the papers. Finished the business and left, but the thoughts would not give peace. Why am I so lost? Why don't I know what to do? He thought to himself on the way. Inaction erased his individuality and made him a person from the crowd. The desire to cut all ties and shut himself off arose again. His days were reduced to the bath, fishing, and ridding in a world without the internet and games. Only communication remained, but over time it became a burden. In the past world, he knew how to shut himself off a few short phrases, and the conversation was over. Now every dialogue touched the heart, and pain mostly arises from love itself. He felt that true love is known only when the heart works at the limit of its strength. Birth rate is falling because people do not dare to marry. His heart, filled with thoughts of Yura, was already standing on the very edge. Even loving her, his mind resisted. He got tangled in contradictions again, and felt that this had already become his natural state. Reflecting within himself, he decided that there was no one more miserable than him. Meanwhile, life buzzed in the tavern, but Yura ran in there anxious, as if seeking salvation. And Kigo sat by the river with a fishing rod in his hands, looking at his reflection and thinking that he looked like a dead man who did not know what to do next. In this world, he felt like a stranger and a fugitive, but he knew, as long as he was alive, he had to eat and work, even without a purpose. He was marinating fish with caviar and pepper, inventing new flavors, but Ash's barking made him go outside. The girls were standing by the gate. Opening it, he asked what had happened. From Ash's reaction, it was clear that monsters were chasing them. He quickly led them into the yard, closed the gate, and invited them inside. The girls thanked him, but when they began to undress, he was embarrassed and sternly asked them to dress. It was not proper in a stranger's home. Suddenly Ash froze. Kigo suspected traces of monsters and was about to go out to check, but the girls, trembling, unexpectedly offered to spend the night with him. He saw that they were exhausted, but still refused. He showed them the guest room, lit the stove, and let them rest, while he decided to scout around. After making sure it was quiet outside, he returned, drank a little, and lay down. A sudden blinding flash in the room abruptly woke him from sleep. The girls sneaked into his bedroom and climbed onto the bed. He begged them to stop, but they did not listen, so he had to climb onto the table. He was about to run outside when a man burst into the house and sternly declared that these were his girls. He demanded the potion. Kigo was stunned. How did he know about the elixir that restores body parts? The man attacked him, but Kigo set his hair on fire and drove him out of the house. He decided that the attacker was sent by Heinrich himself. The man fled and Kigo stayed, looking at the girls in confusion and not daring to send them out into the cold night, when suddenly a cart with Margot appeared behind the fence. The young man did not expect to see Margot and friends at all. The surprise took his breath away. Frightened for Kigo, they immediately told everything and the picture became clear. The girls were drugged, and behind the attack was a former swindler from the Red District, who ordered 3 beauties to kidnap him. It was thanks to Urina's connections in the entertainment district that Margot managed to learn about the plan and rushed to help. The girls were sent to rest in the forge, and Margot leaned toward Kigo and quietly whispered that Urina was terribly worried about him, so they decided to arrange a small feast, although there was little food and it was already late. Kigo sincerely thanked his comrades for their patience and proudly announced that today they had a new dish, cheese with cod roe, which made the friends burst with delight and call the taste amazing. They cozily enjoyed the food. Urina poured drinks, and then Kigo, gathering his courage, invited her to go outside to talk. He had long stopped visiting her shop and finally had to explain the reason. It was so cold outside that the girl immediately shivered, and he, struck by her vulnerability, apologized and threw a warm fur coat over her shoulders, after which they both looked up at the sky. Suddenly, the first snow began to fall. In the glow of the snowflakes, Urina seemed to him an angel with pure white wings. She smiled broadly and glowed in the darkness. Kigo apologized for not visiting her for a long time, but now he had to say the most important thing, everything he carried in his heart, because otherwise this snow would take his words away forever. He confessed that he could not stop thinking about her, gathered his courage, and whispered that he loved her, and in response heard the same simple and sincere words she loved him too. They looked into the distance with relief while he shook the snow off her shoulders, and suddenly moisture appeared in his eyes, tears rolled down by themselves, as if his heart had finally opened. It seemed to him that along with the snow, that burning pain would dissolve, but one thing would remain: the desire to always be near, to comfort her when she is sad, to become a shield when it is dangerous. On this night when angel wings danced with snow in the sky, he firmly vowed to be her sword and shield. And at that very moment, suddenly a puppy ash jumped out of the darkness. Friends who were spying on the confession jumped out of the shadows, and everyone felt awkward at their unexpected appearance. But in a moment, they sincerely greeted the lovers, and the company burst into joyful exclamations, full of warmth and sincerity. Kigo could not believe it. The night turned into a real celebration. Songs, laughter, and a friendly feast. They fell asleep together right on the floor, and he thought that in the morning he would definitely prepare rice soup for everyone. In the morning, saying goodbye and promising to meet again, everyone was already hurrying to their own affairs. Kigo handed Urina a blanket, whispered a few words in the local language. She responded with a few Japanese words, and they both became a little happier. After saying goodbye, he was left alone, and a sudden sneeze seemed to remind him it was time to return home. Only a few hours had passed, but a desire to see Urina again was already burning inside him. Loneliness was tearing his heart, and he hurriedly rushed out onto the street. On the way, he wondered if she was still working at that place, and when he just imagined how she had to endure drunk clients, anger flared up inside him, but at the same time, he understood forbidding would mean taking away her freedom. Feelings took over, and despite hesitation, he found himself in front of the tavern. In the city, even friends were already asleep, so he did not wake them and quietly approached the door, overwhelmed with shame and anxiety. But if there was ever a moment in his life when he had to act, it was this one. Kigo opened the door and entered. His gaze immediately fell on Urina. He shielded her from strangers' eyes and led her aside, trying to hide his nervousness. He asked her not to be afraid. She felt his care and thanked him, but the visitors did not like his abrupt appearance. Suddenly all the girls surrounded him, touching him and calling him little fluffy client, and Ash, like a true favorite, immediately won hearts and seemed to become the establishment's talisman. An older woman approached them, the matron of the establishment. Suddenly Kigo's danger instinct flared up, but she only greeted them, and he sighed with relief. Suddenly bandits burst into the hall and immediately grabbed Urina. Kigo felt these were the ones better not to get involved with, and when they approached him and one started poking his head, speaking in some foreign language, it became clear escape was impossible. The young man instantly recognized the attacker as the same mohawk he had once set on fire. A fleeting sympathy ran through his hair, but he knew Urina was working here, so everything had to be settled peacefully to avoid bringing new troubles upon her. He had few belongings, as he had given most to the nobleman, so he pulled out a vial of potion and ordered the man to drink it, not even knowing if it was suitable for hair, but the man greedily drained it to the bottom. And a miracle happened. The hair grew back again, even longer and thicker than before, and Kigo, looking at the people around who rejoiced at this restoration, felt a strange déjà vu. He was about to relax and have a drink with Urina, but suddenly a man grabbed her arm and said sternly that the conversation was not over, so Kigo jumped up, ignited a fiery blade, and burned his hair again, while the matron struck him in the stomach so hard he fell down, and Kigo sincerely thanked her. He rushed to Urina and asked if she was all right, but realized that even the hostess of the establishment was in danger and she could not stay here, so he turned to the owner with a plea to release the girl, looking into her eyes imploringly. Kigo took out a bag with 300 gold coins and gave it to the woman. Urina was more precious to him than any money. The girl also begged to be let go. The mistress hesitated for another minute and finally agreed. Urina threw herself into his arms and sincerely thanked him, and the mistress promised to distract the bandits while they escaped, and that is exactly what happened. When the thugs rushed to grab Urina, the matron stood between them and did not let them break through, holding back their assault. They could not escape far. They turned into a dark alley and rushed further into the depths of the streets. Hiding behind a barrel, Kigo feverishly racked his brains over how to protect the girl, and finally managed to freeze the puddle in front of them. There was no mana at all, so he summoned the wind, which lifted the skirt of a passing girl and distracted the bandits. They instantly rushed to her, but slipped on the ice and fell to the ground. Making sure they were alive, Kigo heard an angry scolding from Urina. "Don't you dare lift other people's skirts anymore," apologized and led her to the cart. He was walking down the road and suddenly heard, the bandits were caught now, they would no longer pose a threat, and their weapons became his spoils. At the city gates, the guards shouted greetings to them, but Kigo and Urina did not even stop, they kept running. That night they kissed, and suddenly the howling ceased. The snow stopped falling as if nature itself blessed their love. On the quiet road where only the rumble of wheels was heard, Urina wrote a letter. Even if it becomes hard for them and pain breaks their hearts, she still wants to be with him because she loves him boundlessly. She knew that he was drawn to solitude and misanthropy, but she accepted him completely, even inventing an imaginary escape route for him, and he could not understand how she could be so kind to him. He felt superfluous in this world, but he knew, if he woke up tomorrow in Japan without Urina and Ash, his heart would break. He could no longer imagine life without her. Thus began their life together. He dreamed that they would grow old together, that every day he would tell her again and again that he loved her, and he was sure only good awaited them ahead. One day there was a knock at the door. It was Margot and Juno. They had not seen each other for a long time. Urina had left her things with them, and Kigo asked how the matron from her former establishment was doing. Friends helped carry everything into the house. Juno enthusiastically talked with the girl, and Margot meanwhile thanked Kigo for the cheese and caviar, and added that the ingredients had run out, so he would have to go fishing again. Kigo agreed to go fishing, entrusted his friends to guard the house, kissed Urina in front of everyone, and blushing from their smiles, set off to the river. He longed for Ash's warmth and hurried to finish, but suddenly near the road he noticed something strange. The ground was covered with holes, as if from thorns. He was attacked from behind, but the shield withstood the spike strike. A new monster grew before him, and from the assessment he understood, it was a giant sea urchin thrown into the river. Flashed through his mind, the ecosystem was disturbed, the servants were dying, and because of this such creatures appeared, so he drew his thunder sword, stood to protect the horse, hid behind a rock, and noticed that the spikes were released at regular intervals. There were a few moments for reloading. Waiting for the right moment, he jumped out of cover and hit with the first strike. He killed the monster. The level increased, and despite the cold, he began to cut the carcass to use it. The assessment revealed only superficial signs, but they looked promising, so he even dared to taste a piece of the urchin's meat. Even the purple sea urchin, which grew on first-class seaweed, could not compare in taste to this giant. Its size was even somewhat frightening, and Kigo loaded the prey onto the cart. Excitement seized him. He shouted and decided to immediately take it home before new monsters attacked. When he returned, his friends froze at the sight. They had never tasted sashimi or such bizarre creatures, but despite their surprise, everyone eagerly awaited what Kigo would prepare. For the first course, he served the sea urchin in salt water, hoping his friends would sense its delicate flavor. They tasted cautiously, and Kigo could not understand what emotions were written on their faces. Suddenly their voices merged into one, all enthusiastically praising the dish, and then he took on the main treat, mixing the tender meat of the urchin with egg, cheese, and fluffy omelet. He served them a new delicacy. The friends ate with pleasure and asked for seconds, and Kigo felt true happiness watching them savor his dishes. When the meal ended, he headed to the bath to rest. In winter, bathing under the starry sky was a special pleasure. The body, bound by cold, finally relaxed in warm water, and the clear sky gave a feeling of infinity. But suddenly there was a knock at the door, and he thought it was Margot. However, it was Urina. She entered completely naked, and Kigo, with horror in his voice, asked what had happened, but the girl silently approached and lowered herself into the water. They sat back to back, and only then did Kigo realize how persistent the women of this world could be. Urina turned to him. She stood up and asked him to look at her body. He began to turn, feeling that he remained a man, but in the end he could not stand it. He jumped out of the water and ran into the house. He decided that Juno was to blame and called her a pervert. The girl immediately began to apologize, and the irritated Urina also entered the house. She reproached him for leaving her alone, and Kigo, agitated and confused, suddenly confessed his love and began to apologize, but the mocking glances of Margot and Juno only confused him even more. Night fell, the friends went to bed, and he sat at the table for a long time writing down his thoughts. In another world he was a loner, but now he had Urina, the love of his life, the dearest person. Now he had one goal: to protect her, and he could no longer pretend to be a lone wolf. But one problem did not let go. The aristocrat Heinrich, who sent bandits after them, had set his eyes on this house as well, and if Urina was in danger, staying here became too risky. Putting those thoughts aside, he firmly promised himself not to leave this place now he was not alone, and tomorrow morning he would discuss everything with his friends. And indeed, the next day he revealed the whole truth: how he healed Byron's hand, and how Urina was attacked by thugs, almost certainly on Heinrich's orders. Everyone agreed without hesitation. If the authorities seriously took action against them, he would not even have time to resist, so they decided to leave the house and move on. Margot handed him a map. Before them lay a map of the outskirts of the Kingdom of Lancaster. Previously, Kigo had no need for it, but now it became invaluable. He thanked his comrade, and Yurina admitted that she had never traveled and was eagerly awaiting the journey. He promised himself to overthrow Heinrich someday, but now the most important thing was to spend time with Yurina and take care of their safety. They decided to give the chickens to a farmer known by Sarasa. Margot was to go hunting with Juno and take Elsa with her. Kigo did not want to cause problems, but had to say goodbye. During the gathering, he sat down and wrote a letter to his friends, asking that it be read in private. But the most important thing was something else. He had to take a step in his relationship with Yurina. He handed her a flower, and the girl at first did not understand his intention. The young man solemnly promised he would love her all his life and protect her from any trouble. He wondered if he had chosen the right words and felt that no phrases could convey her beauty. Yurina, with tears in her eyes, whispered that she would love him always, because he was her sun that shines every day. He uttered the oath taught to him by Sarasa, the vow of a happy marriage, and raised a special flower that became their wedding symbol. The wedding was only for two. Ash barked as if blessing them, and Kigo for a moment felt like a real priest. An unusual courage ignited in his heart. He reminded his friends once again about the left letters and announced that it was time to hit the road. The farewell was incredibly hard. They felt they could no longer endure here. Kigo did not know if they would ever return. Margot spoke about overthrowing the nobility, but inwardly doubted if it was even possible. He sincerely hoped that his friends would take care of themselves and find happiness, and he himself vowed to protect Yurina from all evil. Wolves ran alongside the wagon like guards, and Yurina shone with joy, admiring the spectacle. In response to Kigo's question about Margot's gift, she explained that it was a slingshot for self-defense. If the projectile was imbued with an attribute, it would turn into a real weapon, and then it turned out that this item belonged to Heinrich. Kigo was almost certain that Heinrich was hunting him, and felt that flaunting that amazing tincture was a fatal mistake. They stood on the edge of an abyss, and the journey now seemed to him the best escape. Their direction was Tirana. Traveling at night on foreign roads was dangerous, even with wolves nearby, but they finally made a stop. For Kigo, it felt like a honeymoon. Their romantic ride under the stars really looked like a journey of newlyweds, but the open carriage exposed them to everyone. Kigo counted that he had 3,000 gold coins, quite enough to buy a covered wagon. He wondered if his friends were now looking at the same moon, and fell asleep next to Yurina. The next day, suddenly a flock of birds rose from behind the trees, and a strange sound made Kigo alert. Before them stood a cockatrice. Yurina rushed to cover him, but he stopped her. It was too dangerous. She had to stay aside. He summoned the system and conducted an assessment of the monster. Kigo summoned wolves and ordered them to rush at the cockatrice to distract and restrain its movements. Next came the poisonous arrow. This time it pierced the defense, and the monster howled. To finish off the monster, he again threw the summoned wolf forward, but the cockatrice released a poisonous breath, and Kigo only managed to shout. The wolf retreated. The wolf did not manage to dodge. It became truly dangerous, but at that moment, Yurina was nearby, and they struck together. The monster fell. The system announced a new level, but Kigo did not rejoice. He poured a detox elixir into the wolf's mouth. But the potion proved useless. They dug a grave and buried their faithful ally. Kigo thanked him for loyalty and protection until the last breath. His heart did not weaken. On the contrary, he felt new strength, like a hero returning after trials. Meanwhile, Heinrich boiled with rage upon hearing the news of the bandits' failure. They had again allowed the victims to escape, and he thundered that he did not need apologies. He needed results. The hired mafiosi warned that Kigo was a very dangerous opponent, but Heinrich only laughed and finally ordered to capture Kigo with Yurina and bring them to him. He rang the bell, ordered to call the captain and gather 100 people. Upon hearing their pledge of loyalty, he felt a surge of confidence. Henrik firmly believed, as long as Jilla was nearby, success was guaranteed. If Yurin was caught, Kigo would be forced to brew a restorative potion. He had already arranged with the Inquisition for torture. But as with the dagger, he knew well, there would always be someone who would rise against him, yet he managed to subdue the city council and even sway the guildmaster Shulag to his side. He could not execute or imprison opponents that would ruin his image, so exile and house arrest seemed acceptable, and he decided to use Donnie's hands to cleanse the city of his father's supporters. Meanwhile, Kigo wrote letters to friends. In each, he forbade showing the contents to others, and Margot confessed that she wanted to overthrow Henrik but asked not to take it too personally. He thanked Margot for the weapons and armor that once saved his life, and admitted, although sometimes her company annoyed him, it was precisely she who saved him from loneliness. He asked Margot to watch everyone in Leicester, especially adventurers whose lives depended on the dragon's anvil, and left him his sincerest wishes, along with a secret perhaps he would never return. He also wrote to Juno saying it aloud was difficult for him, thanked for the joint victory over the cockatrices, and admitted that he himself would not have done it. He recalled his bitter suffering because of Sarasa and the warm comfort he found in Elsa, informed that he planned to head north but would always protect Urin. He asked Juno not to rush into dangerous adventures and never to bring Elsa to tears, but on the contrary to make her happy, and added that his hut could be used for rest. He also wrote to Sarasa recalled how she was the first to extend her hand to him when he knew nothing. He said that even if he could not return, he would definitely remember her kindness. He even shared his culinary discoveries, told that the hedgehog he ate turned out to be an egg of a water monster, and advised to be careful with their spikes that shoot out every 3 seconds. He wrote simple, sincere words of gratitude to Elsa for her kindness and care for Ash, allowed her to use his house, wished happiness, asked not to worry, regretted that the separation would be long, but accepted fate as it is. Eliza showed Juno the letter, and he silently nodded, as if saying he understood everything. Kigo wished them happiness and said he was not saying goodbye. Juno promised to sometimes come to Eliza, help with cleaning, and keep her company. Margot was simply boiling with anger. He called Kigo a misanthrope, someone who does not want to live in Leicester, and turns away from friends. In despair, he still admitted, Kigo must be free. Kigo began writing a letter again, this time to Master Byron and everyone he knew. One single thought spun in his head, to defeat Henry and save his comrades. At that time, Ash spoke in his own language, reminding that the name given to him by his master was priceless. He saw how colors of souls burst from the light, and the souls of Kigo and Urina blazed with fiery flame. Their unity made the color of the soul even brighter. Ash missed Sarasa and Elsa, but at the same time rejoiced in adventures alongside Uncle Blue Wolf. The elder wolf taught him a lot, to find the way among roads and villages, told about the wolf settlement and the sacred tree that had grown for over 10,000 years. The souls of fallen wolves merged with it and became heroic spirits. Therefore the wolves became fearless and boldly stood against the strongest enemies. Ash knew within himself he would have to grow slowly, harden his character, and learn to speak clearly, and Uncle was a gentle but strict mentor. But life was cut short by the cockatrice. Uncle Ash, together with friends, sang a requiem for the warrior, and his soul, like a warm glow, rose to the sky and merged with the tree. The wolves whispered that their master Kigo was a warrior who could even defeat Ash's mother, their former ruler. Ash remembered this only in flashes of memory. The mother once attacked the master, and he defeated her, and that was all he knew. For him, it was a natural, ruthless law of the jungle. The weaker dies by the stronger. He did not consider the master an enemy of the mother, because he fought the same way for life and protection. In Kigo's heart there was not only strength, there lived kindness and a beautiful soul, and now Ash swore to fight for him under the watchful eyes of mother and uncle in the sky, and the wolves acknowledged, the little one had grown up. Having said goodbye to the grave of the blue wolf, the travelers moved on, and finally reached the city of Taranta, huge, noisy, where traveling performers gathered, but at the same time they had to be careful and not leave traces. Urina looked exhausted after several nights in the wagon, so Kigo decided to let her rest. He rented a room and paid a boy to watch the belongings and do the shopping until morning. Their apartment had a kitchen and a shower. Kigo said they would just rest today, but Urina came up and whispered that she did not want him to run away from her again. In the morning, the boy brought everything ordered, even a wagon with a roof and a good horse. Kigo paid him for the work. He named the horse Queen May, and the boy exclaimed excitedly, "What a wonderful name." He jokingly asked for silver coins for the help, and Kigo laughed. Urina handed him a note. She dreamed of seeing the city, even if only for a short time. Kigo understood the danger and wanted to move on, but he could not refuse. He agreed, and they set off for a walk. They went to the circus and laughed, and enjoyed themselves for a long time. After inspecting the hotel, they immediately understood it was better not to stay in this city for long, no matter how attractive it was. The premonition did not fail. Kigo danger was already lurking very close. Learning that they were in Taranti, Heinrich instantly sent the Corpus Juru in pursuit, but when they arrived they found empty rooms. Meanwhile, Heinrich had already declared Kigo a criminal and ordered wanted posters to be hung all over the city. He even imagined a generous reward, but feared that other nobles would then pay attention to the boy. The potion was only his, and he wanted to force Kigo to submit, even torturing Urina right before Kigo's eyes. He ordered the horse to be brought and began talking about a new woman to whom he would give lessons of humiliation. At this time, Johnny, a street thug from poverty, was boasting his fierce mohawk. He had endured pain, and over time gathered a gang and began to rule among the hungry slums. When a strange client with a silver beard approached him, he gave the order, first to seduce, then to kidnap. But everything went awry. the plan failed, they lost their weapons, and Johnny also ended up without his precious mohawk. Next, the story takes us to Yura. She worked in a tavern she considered her home, and for many local women and men, this place became their only family. Her childhood was a complete horror. Beside her, her older brother Sato endured beatings, bullying, and humiliation. When she was 7 years old, her mother could no longer bear it and committed suicide. When their father was not around, the children ran away and began to survive on their own in the slums, carrying wounds in their hearts that never healed. The brother always gave his sister the larger share of food, remaining hungry himself. Finally, his patience broke from exhaustion. He fainted, and illness completely broke his body. Soon he died, and for the girl the world lost its meaning. She sat at the edge of the road and silently awaited death, until suddenly someone's warm hand reached out to her. Strong hands easily lifted her. She tried to say something, but her voice trembled, and in the embrace there was such kindness and protection, as if wings had grown behind her back. It was her future mentor Josephine, who sheltered the girl, gave her a clean bed, hearty food, and a chance to recover. When her sight returned and her voice broke through tears, she felt warmth again for the first time. Later she began helping Josephine with the household, and eventually working in the tavern. There everyone had their own task. No one asked unnecessary questions. They accepted her as their own, and day by day the wounds in her heart slowly healed. Once her mother taught her simple defensive techniques, then the child did not understand why, but now everything became clear. These were ways to protect herself from kidnappings and child trafficking, because her mother had already saved her from such a fate twice. Visiting her brother's grave, she whispered to him about her new life and work, her heart aching from memories, and then came the news of her father's death, and the past was finally shattered. It was in the tavern that she met the one destined to become her fate, Kigo. Now he recalled how Urina once said she loved the field flowers of the red bear that grow even through dirt, and her openness with trust meant more to him than words. He noticed how she was increasingly less shy about showing her tattoos, and what impressed him was not their number, but the effortless ease with which she shed her clothes, not hiding the traces of the past. For the first time in his life, pure love blossomed. He felt that nowhere and never would he find such an amazing person as Urina, and he was ready to give everything for her. One day they were attacked by a giant sea urchin, but thanks to the courage of friends, they quickly managed and survived without losses. After the fight, they prepared dinner together, sharing all the chores between them, and spent a quiet day in warm, everyday comfort. Together they cooked, and each dish turned out special, filled with care and love, which they shared with each other. When it was time to rest, Urina often dozed off elsewhere, so Kigo gently picked her up and carried her to bed, because he knew, now he no longer had the right to live only for himself. Even then, when he first stepped over the threshold of her establishment, she stood out among others, smiling and at the same time detached from men, with tattoos that hid pain and old scars of the soul. Despite everything, she knew how to rejoice and smile, because there were people nearby who had gone through the same trials, and together they created their family under the wing of a mother mentor. When friends asked Urina if she would be lonely, she only smiled and replied that on the contrary she was happy to set off on a journey, and Kigo understood. If she were perfect, he would never have loved her so. She did everything possible to survive in these harsh conditions, and it was her indomitable strength that reminded him of Jorbura, so he decided to express his feelings in a sincere letter. He swore, as soon as she wakes up, he will show her how madly he loves her, and never again will he keep the truth silent. But in the morning the girl was offended, and only a quiet good morning slightly softened her mood. He understood yesterday he never dared to say the most important thing, so he handed her a letter and asked her to read it. She reread it again and again, like that old picture book that was once given as a gift. Although they were close, the letters seemed to connect two different worlds. They confessed their love to each other once more, and Kigo felt that he was falling in love with her every day.